as you may know, we try to be fire instructors, and that's complicated. Um,
Yeah, lots of luck with that. Yeah,
yeah. So I wanted to chat with you and talk about first off your personal experiences, but also about being a fire instructor in the United States, for instance, like a little
sure.
bit about like get to understand like where do things come from, like you firefighter, fire instructor one and fire instructor two, and like NFPA 1403 and things like that. Like a little bit of overview of that for a lot of people who listen who's not from America, as I'm
Okay.
not, and I picked up bits and pieces here and there, but
Yeah, a
my
few more than just
pictures.
bits and pieces. I think you've been
I've been
been
poking.
snooping around here for a long time.
I've been poking the box for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so if I start requesting here, it's like if I'm an up and coming firefighter in the United States and I want to dip my toes in the deep pond, which is fire instructing, where do I start generally? I know there's a lot of differences between states and so on, but where, like, generally, how does it work?
So how it works is this is the challenge in the United States, which you probably understand, not just in the fire service, but the U.S. in general, is a very parochial country, right? I mean, we like our states. Our states like to be independent. The cities within those states like to be independent. We often joke here in Illinois. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and we joke about Chicago being the state of Chicago. And quite literally, a lot of the legislation that's written in the state of Illinois exempts Chicago. So Chicago writes its own, in a lot of different ways. It's called
Yeah.
home rule. So we like our independence. We like our, and it manifests itself as what I call colloquialism. Okay, it
Yeah.
just, and so what happens is, it's a funny thing. If you ask somebody, how do you become a doctor in the United States, they can tell you, right?
Yeah.
You go to pre-med, you go to medical school, you got a residency, right? If you want to be a hairdresser, they can tell you how to do that. But if you ask them how to be a fireman, the first question is going to be, well, where do you live?
Yeah.
Because where you live is going to dictate a lot about how you have to, how that comes about, right? We're getting better, but we have a ways to go. So if the question is, how do I become a firefighter? A lot's going to have to do with where you live, and the better answer is check with your state. Because generally individual states kind of dictate how that's going to come about, right? What the rules are. And for the most part, I can't speak to all 50 of them, but for the most part, the 50 states, their certification process, their basic requirements are based on the NFPA standards.
Yeah.
So you can get a general idea of what's required of you, but exactly what steps, what hoops you got to jump through, what steps you got to take, that's going to vary a lot from state to state. But I can say, generally speaking, that if you want to become, whether it's paid or volunteer, in most jurisdictions, you have to meet that minimum NFPA standard for basic firefighter. That's gonna be the first step to get
Yeah.
yourself in the door. And whether that's a requirement to get on the job or if it's something you need to get after you get on the job is going to depend on how desperate your locality is for firefighters.
Well,
You know?
I mean, even though go around Europe and there's massive differences, like there's United States isn't that different towards like Europe most times.
Yeah,
There's very many countries in Europe, and Sweden is among one of them, where it's basically the fire chief goes like,
yeah, yeah,
I think this is a good standard, or this
sure.
is not a good standard, or I
Yeah.
don't like standards.
Yes, we have we
uh,
have that. We call them here the family owned and operated fire departments.
well, I mean,
Or I
everybody
call
has
them.
their own. Yeah, well, I mean, everybody has their own opinion about what the greatest thing is, and of course, there's a huge amount of benefits doing it that way. There's also drawbacks, of
Yeah,
course. Um,
yeah.
I'm let's say I'm a firefighter in the United States, and I like where did like if I'm in Sweden, there's not a single course you can take, like official course to become a fire instructor. It's like because Sweden is a very small country, but
Yeah,
that has advantages. We should. It's much easier to make things happen in a small country. Just it is a
yeah,
small fire department. A lot of times,
sure, exactly.
less hoops to jump through. But still, we don't have a formal education for fire instructors and anything. It's basically, I mean, I think you're a good guy. Let's go out and teach the other ones.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
so generally here, we're going to ask the guy, again, most states, right? And it's going to vary just like your experience is. How desperately do you need these folks?
yeah.
But most states, if for no other reason than to protect themselves from a legal standpoint,
Yeah.
are going to want you to get what we would call Fire Instructor 1, right?
Yeah.
So it's much like, and again, it's based on the NFPA standard. How good the curriculum is going to vary a lot. I'm sorry about that background buzzer. If you caught that, that'll be the last thing. All right, that's done.
It sounds like you're shaving yourself, but
Yeah,
not in the face.
The wash was ending. It was letting me know it's time to change the wash. Okay, so you're going to get, the basic instructor one, and most states, my state, Illinois, will have a curriculum, a state approved curriculum for instructor one. You will go to a state approved class that's offered throughout the state, and you'll take that. In Illinois, they call us the 40-hour state because most of our certification classes require 40 hours of contact time. A lot of states have reduced that. Illinois is still mostly 40 hours for these kind of things.
Yeah.
So you need 40 hours of contact time. The curriculum is supposed to meet or exceed the NFPA standard.
Yeah.
You get your blessing, you get your certificate. Now you can instruct, or at least you're certified, right? And it's not a bad system because it helps to guarantee that there's at least some standardization of the instruction across the state, at least, right? So I have a certain level of confidence that at least I know what you've been exposed to, right? Yeah. So I might not be sure that you absorbed it all or that you care about it or that you're going to apply it, but at least I know what you've been exposed to with a pretty good degree of certainty. So it has that benefit, And in a state like
how old is that? How old is the NFPA regulation? Like roughly, do you know?
How old they are?
Yeah. Oh, like when did you are we talking 50 years ago or are you talking 20 or like?
Well, the standards have been around probably at least 50 years. They're reviewed. Don't quote me on this. I'm going to be wrong because they may vary. But there's a revision cycle, right? Yeah. And I think it's a 3-year cycle. So they're reviewed and revised on a pretty regular basis. So that any changes that are made, curriculum changes and things like that. And then of course all the states, anybody that's going to use them has to update their curriculum to match the revisions.
A lot of standards comes have the saying that it's written in blood. Do you think that was there these kind of standards? Do you think was it because people did stupid things or was it because of people who wanted to improve?
There's both, right? Because the NFPA standard is it covers all kinds of things. It covers smoke detectors, it covers wiring, right? But the stuff that applies to us in the fire service, I'd say that that's very much true. That much of what's in those standards came as a result of close calls or line of duty deaths, injuries that occurred. Because they're what we call consensus standards, right? They have no power of law. They can't be enforced until a local jurisdiction adopts them, right? Yeah. And they're built by consensus. So these committees, and that comes with its problems, right? What do you call a horse built by a committee? You call it a giraffe, right? It's not a horse anymore, right?
Consensus is sometimes dangerous, but
but the advantage is, our whole political system is built on that, and I'm sure much of yours too. The idea is that you don't want to be changing every other day, right? In order to move these things that are going to impact a lot of people, if you don't have consensus, you shouldn't be making the changes. So there's all kinds of baggage, as we all know, that comes with it. But in the long run, I think that's the better way. So there's nothing that's stopping you from exceeding the standard, which many people do. So,
yeah, at least people. When someone has to pay for it, it's a bit different ballgame.
Sure.
Then standards tend to become minimum viable. Education that tends to be the norm. That usually is the case. It seems like. But so the fire instructor one. Can you roughly? Are we talking Are we talking how do you build a PowerPoint, or are you talking this is how you
So
design a live fire training
yeah,
event?
no, not anywhere near that. So instructor one in the state of Illinois, which is the only thing I can speak to with any kind of well, semi-authority anyway,
Yeah,
um, basically says that you can deliver a lesson plan that somebody else put together for you.
yeah,
Okay. And that you've had and that you've demonstrated that you can do this. So as you go through this 40-hour program, there's obviously the didactic stuff, the vocabulary and all these kind of things. But what it boils down to is you're going to have to do 3 or 4 different deliveries of some material, right?
yeah,
And before so basically, kind of put you through that grist mill, because most of us are afraid or reticent about, delivering in front of people, right? So
yeah,
it's to help these firefighters get through that. Okay, you can do this. You have done this to your peers, right? And
yeah.
and in a pressure setting, and so now you can do it and have at it, right? So that's essentially what it is that you can deliver somebody else's lesson plan. When you get into instructor 2 in the state of Illinois, then it's, can you develop that lesson plan?
Yeah.
So what goes into developing a lesson plan? How do you take these standards, or how do you take your department's SOGs and turn them into, all right, I've got an objective, I've got a list, how do I meet that objective, and I've got a methodology to test it. So that would be instructor 2 in Illinois anyway, and some states blend that together. They don't have an instructor 2, they just have an instructor 1, and that becomes part of the challenge. So if you're going from state to state, you have to look carefully at what does that instructor 1 mean, because it won't mean the same thing from state to state.
Basically, it's different curriculum, but it's the same standard.
Yeah, it'll meet the same standard, but
Yeah.
some states have elected, because again, nobody says you have to adopt these things, so they've elected to just put it together into one program.
Yeah. Well, so on fire instructor 1 and fire instructor 2, like, would you actually get out and throw ladders?
Oh, sure. That is a piece of even an instructor 1, right? So there's going to be, can you run a didactic drill? Can you run
a practical drill?
Talk in front of a group, do the test, and then it's also, can you demonstrate, some skill set, right? Yeah. So typically, an instructor 1 that we typically wouldn't test them on ladders, because when you're in in that environment, you want to reduce the risk of injury as much as you possibly can. But you would typically do like hose rolling, ropes and knots, anything that involves manual dexterity. You would test that student on making sure that they, understand how to go through that process. Ladders, I mean, it's up to the jurisdiction. If they want to test the guy on ladders, they can do that. But yeah, the expectation is that you would be able to deliver that kind of instruction as well. Hands-on, physical. If that was your question.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
yeah.
You said it revised every 3 years. Like when 1700 was created, there's a lot of details on like basically how to do firefighting. Like, would that change any in the curriculum of instructor 1, instructor 2, or is it there to generically?
We sure hope so. We sure hope so. I sure hope so.
Yeah.
I can't say we. There's a 1-point-something million firefighters in the United States, and I'm sure some of them don't want anything to do with it. Yeah. But I sure hope so, because a big part, it's an interesting thing, is that, and Dan Madrzykowski, who and are familiar with, has often talked about that the fire service in the United States for decades and decades talked about everything but actually fire, right? And understanding the dynamics of fire, the chemistry, the physics. And not that we never did it, but I think we just lost our touch with it, right? We got so engaged in other things coming out of the 60s, 70s, 80s. And as our scope of responsibility expanded with EMS and hazmat and all this other stuff, we're trying to jam all that into one set, so many, you only got so many hours, right? Yeah. And we lost touch with that fundamental part of our job, and we have to reintroduce, excuse me, I think we have to reintroduce it. I think we just, if you go far enough back, in the manuals and the instruction books and the stuff in the United States.
Yeah.
They covered a lot of what 1700 is talking about. And then they just, I always tell the joke that the book can only be this big. And if you cram something into it, something has to come out.
Yeah.
And what has come out, right, over the last several years has been the fire dynamics, the fundamental stuff.
Yeah.
And we need to reintroduce that.
I found it, not confusing. I found it interesting that where in America, when I first come in here, every time I heard "let's get back to the basics," which is a very common thread you hear in America, it was typically always rephrased to as throwing ladders and dragging hose line, and I was like, but like
right.
What's the basic for me? It's always been like the theory of understanding. Okay, so when why do we drag a hose line, and then actually how doing it how. So that was always like the basic for me, but at least from my look at it, it's really starting to change, because even what I would consider very anti, for instance, 1700 and so on, are also talking about the value of fire behavior and this that kind of science to understand, so it has to like snuck back into what maybe basic is considered to be.
Yes, absolutely. It's the most basic of basics.
Yeah.
And when when I get on my soapbox in front of a group of firefighters, I say that there's three knowledge or skill bases that you have to master. And the first is fire dynamics. The second is building construction, the built environment. And the third is your
that's
tools.
So boring.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's just because I do it.
The tools and equipment is where all the fun is, right?
Yeah.
That's where you get to break shit and get dirty, right? So that's where we spend all our time, and I get it. But that doesn't do you any good if you don't understand the other two, right? So if you really, to your point, if you really want to get back to basics, the most basic of all things is the physics and chemistry of fire, and how I would add how buildings are built and how they come apart.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
I mean, I have since I do mostly teaching all over the world, I do very little building construction, because building construction is very local. But it is I think in Sweden we've been fairly good at doing. We've been decent at handling building construction, but we have such an easy environment than compared to a lot of other companies, because we have fairly sturdy buildings simply because of climate.
Yeah.
And also fairly, at least going back in time, fairly cheap raw materials like wood. So it wasn't like engineered I-beams and stuff like that.
Sure.
I mean, that came way later. I mean, that maybe started being an issue now, like lightweight construction, because of not really cost. Well, cost also maybe now, but for environmental reason, like the environmental impact of building.
You're going to use less resources. Yeah. Right. And there's a natural thing. If you're an engineer and your job is to engineer waste out of the system, you're going to do that, right?
Yeah,
and so, extra mass to an engineer's waste, right? So the more I can engineer out of this, the better.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it fits all the boxes besides just like fire safety, and fire safety is not a big enough problem. So like we can't change that. We just have to handle it. Like, you build whatever constructions you like, and we'll do the best we can. Like that's the answer the fire service pretty much has. And but yeah, building construction for sure. And I'm just happy that I don't have to spend a lot of time with it being international, because it's a mess. But but it is again. I've come from a place in Sweden where it wasn't really a lot of focus on it, because we didn't really have to. But it is starting to change, because we're getting at least some of the lightweight construction that America has, and that will impact, of course, safety for firefighters. It has like. A Swedish fire would never ever understand why American firefighters always have a tool with them, like a Halligan tool, rather.
Right.
Because like they're like, what are you supposed to do with it? Like hammering on the floor, it doesn't it doesn't make a dent in the floor. Like a wall doesn't make a dent. Like what are you going to tear down? Like it's like useless.
Very different here. Yeah. And one of our challenges here, and I have no experience in Europe or anywhere else but the U.S. and Canada a little bit, is that our building codes almost universally throughout the country exempt single-family homes from a lot of the requirements. There's just this your home is your castle kind of thing. Yeah. And so much of the code only applies to multifamily buildings. And so as soon as you get into a single-family home, There a lot of the requirements that are expected everywhere else just aren't required, so people can do whatever they want. And from a management standpoint or an enforcement standpoint, even if you have the codes in place, I mean, I can remodel my house, I can do additions, I can make all kinds of alterations that you're never going to know I'm going to do. Most municipalities here simply don't have the resources to be able to stay on top of all that.
No,
and
it is
politically not acceptable to be intrusive into somebody's home. So that's part of our challenge, is that especially in the older cities, you just don't know what you're getting or how much of the building they've removed. That's a big problem in a lot of cities, a lot of older cities, is that the redundancy has been stripped out by all the sequence of occupants, but it's never been documented or recorded or anywhere. People take bearing walls out, they take beams out, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
But it was because I had a discussion. I think I was in Seattle area somewhere, and we had a discussion about building construction, because in Sweden there's no real laws either about like single family houses. But it's just been a culture of building sturdy, because it's sort of a sign of quality, and people like quality. Like it shouldn't go donk 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 when you knock on a wall. It should go thump thump thump.
Yes.
So I think and again, it's been fairly cheap raw materials, so people could build like that with sort of that. But and again, that's changing now because economy is getting worse everywhere. It seems like, besides China maybe.
And resources are getting more scarce. And
it is. So
it amazes me. I mean, my dad was a firefighter. He was also a carpenter. I was a carpenter on the side. I got some experience in the trade. And what passes as quality construction today is just amazing. What people are willing to pay, but it's all you can get. I mean, you can't really afford what I would consider really high quality materials or high quality construction. And it's not. Nobody's robbing you. It's just labor is expensive. Good quality materials are expensive, and most people simply can't afford that.
A lot of places in the United States, like wood, is really expensive.
Well, right now it's
right now. I understand.
During the whole pandemic thing, it got to be ridiculous. I mean, you were paying $75 for 4x8 sheet goods, basic standard OSB plywood, right? It was just nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, that really puts a dent in your live fire training budget.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So talking about live fire training, so NFPA has the 1403 live fire. Was that how old is that? Is that also 50 years? So are we talking?
That's something less. That's something less than 50 years, because that came about during the course of my career. Yeah. So my career spans 40 years, so I guess I got to be careful with that. But that very much came about. I mean, the standard itself might have existed, but the teeth in the standard has come about in the last 30 years or so. Yeah. And that was a direct result of line of duty deaths on the training ground. Yeah. So when we very specifically said no synthetic fuels, quit burning couches, quit splashing the walls with diesel fuel, that kind of nonsense. That is within my time on the job that has been pulled out.
So I want to talk about 1403, but I mean, I find it interesting. I mean, Sweden, we don't have any of those regulations. We just have the normal, like, don't do bad stuff for the environment for no good reasons, don't do stupid things for no reasons. But there's no specific guideline for live fire training. Because we don't have a history of killing anyone or hurting anyone. I'm not saying Sweden doesn't do stupid things, because we do, and it may be just a law of numbers that make sure that we haven't killed anyone, because there's not a lot of us.
Well, I think there's a cultural thing too, and this is not just Sweden. I think perhaps you might be the best example of it, but I think in most of Europe, certainly in Asia, that I'm familiar with anyway, this whole idea, safety takes on in the fire service is more of an industrial hygiene sort of approach, right? I mean, my work environment should be as safe as I can make it. That's just the given. Yeah. And in the United States, it's often an uphill battle, right? We start with, this is a risky job. People are going to get hurt and killed. No. You don't start with that assumption, right? You start with the assumption that that's not acceptable. Yeah. and we still have a lot of work to do here in that regard. There's still, I wouldn't say a lot, but too many of us that just accept that death and injury is part of the job, and that includes training, and that just is not.
Well, I think I mean I do find, I think that's like you said, one part is culture, because if you take away risk, you take away some of the hero aspect of it. Like there's a direct correlation between being a hero and taking risk. Like that's it. So if you take away the risk, you can question your self-image as being a hero.
Yes.
But it's also, I mean, I think it's a lot of times a false counter argument to saying that if we increase safety, we reduce effectiveness. Like we, if we reduce, and I think a lot of those arguments are not based like they're spouted as, of course, if we increase safety, we're going to be less effective. And a lot of times I don't think that's true.
There's zero data to support that. Zero. And an analogy I like to make, and I'm sticking my neck out here because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm confident I'm accurate with this, is that aircraft carrier pilots have one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. And they also have one of the best safety records.
Yeah.
Your job being dangerous you don't have to have death and injury to prove your job is dangerous. Your job is inherently dangerous. That doesn't mean that you have to have death and injury to support that. You can demonstrate that it's dangerous without that and overcome it. You can prove your professionalism by not getting hurt and killed.
Sometimes I hear their argument that firefighting is not very dangerous, because if you look at like occupational health, a lot of other occupations have more deaths. And I go like, yeah, that might be true, but it's also that maybe the fire service is fairly good at handling risks. So even though it is very dangerous.
Yeah, but the other piece of this, Lars, and I don't know if anybody's really bothered to dig into this, but if you're a carpenter, when you go to work every day for 8 hours, you're carpentering, right? Yeah. You're swinging it, you're performing that function, right?
Yeah.
So when you're a firefighter, you go to work for that day. What portion of that day are you actually firefighting, right? So when you look at the injury rates, are they actually looking at the hours actually performing the work, or just the hours at work? And I think that if you look at the hours actually performing the work, our injury rate is even worse than it looks right now, because we don't spend much of our time, and not just fires, but all the even if you clumped all the emergency response activity, it's such a small portion of the time that you spend at work. I think we have to take that into account as well.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's a problem. But I mean, statistics is just, statistics and bloody lies. If you look at how dangerous is it to, I don't know, put your head into the mouth of an alligator, and look at statistics, you go like that doesn't seem to be that dangerous, because we don't have any instances of heads being crushed by alligators. But we could instantly understand that that's not a good thing to do. Like statistics is hard to say that something is dangerous or not. It's just, again, we tend to not put heads in alligator mouths. And that tends to drive the statistics down. And fire services, for better or worse, I mean, most countries have done firefighting for hundreds of years, and at least we've learned some things that seem to be. I still find it interesting because there's a lot of things that you could say that's very, in this country, you have to have this position here because that's, we have had so many deaths, and then we introduced this position here, and then it went away. And you have another country which doesn't have that position, and they had something else they introduced, and that take all the. It's very hard, but there are some things that like water is a good thing. Like you bring some amount of water at some point, and so on. We have some things that seem to be very good, like work in pairs. Yes. That's very common. Like there are very few countries in the world that work alone. Now, how close between those people you should be, that's up to debate.
and it should be. I mean, there's the environment's going to be different, the operational, and but if you accept the principle, then you're always moving in the right direction, right? You recognize when things, you know where to look. When things are going sideways, you go, well, what could be the proximate cause? Well, they were physically separated, they were separated by communicate, whatever, right? It gives you a roadmap for getting back to righteousness, you know, and I think sometimes that's all we can really ask for.
Yeah, I mean, the Swedish regulation in that regard says something along that they should be in connection with each other. It doesn't specify. So is that vocal? Is that like visual? Is that sense? What is it? And different departments have different, you know, interpretations, and different firefighters have probably different interpretations about what that is. And maybe that's the only way to go, because it's, you know, like it becomes very clunky if you say you can only be 5 feet between the firefighters in any conditions. Go like,
that doesn't get you where you want to be. No,
probably really not. I had a discussion because it's slightly different. I talked to Sendelbach, and he said something I really liked. If you find yourself breaking a standard more than you're following it, your standard is probably too tight or wrong. But like, and he put it in. It's very, very simple. It might be, you know, that, but for me it was like that's very practical advice. Like
sure.
And I would say, like, if you have a standard that would say, you know, like you have to touch your partner at all times, like you have to physically touch them, you would end up breaking it all the time at fires.
Sure.
Because it doesn't make sense.
I think a corollary to that is that if you can't enforce it, or if people aren't enforcing it, then there's something wrong with it as well. Right? I mean, the standard should be enforceable, and it should be something that people are willing, that, you know, not just willing, but they're capable of enforcing. If the thing is so rigid or so overwrought or whatever that it can't be enforced, then all right, you got to go back and figure this out, because you're just wasting your time, and everybody else's. You're putting people in a difficult position.
Like beards in the fire service.
Yes, there you go.
Because it's crazy to have a beard. You could die.
Yeah.
So no, we're not going to go there. I don't know Illinois. No, no, we're not going to go there. So about Fortnite 03. So I mean, again, I think that it's interesting to see Fortnite 3 come about, and I think it's good. I think it's a good standard. At least, I mean, I think it's good to have a standard like that. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's in Fortnite 03, but it's a baseline.
Sure.
You have something to be honest, like, don't do stupid things. I go around burning houses in Sweden, and I'm sometimes I control those acquired structures. Sometimes I'm just there. I'm just a fly on the wall with my cameras, and maybe it's getting better. Maybe it's still the same. But you find these horrible instances of people using. I don't have a problem with using like liquids and like diesel, if you're doing it in the right way, and that's the problem, of course, with liquids. Well, it's very easy to do it wrong. And I've seen some horrible instances where it go wrong. Go like, yeah, you're not on YouTube and you're not in the morgue, but you could be there, and you don't want to be there either. You don't want to be on YouTube, and you don't want to be in the morgue or the burn unit. So I think there's a very good thing to have, and I wish Sweden would that, but Sweden doesn't like. Sweden is like very much like goal-oriented standards and not descriptive standards. So everything is like you should be reasonably safe, and you should be blah blah. It's all those loose words, and they're very good because it allows the regulator to not do a lot of work. And it allows the regulator and the enforcement agencies afterwards to say, well, obviously it wasn't relatively safe because you were hurt. And so it's very easy for them.
I'm not sure that our case law would support that here. I don't, you know, certainly not a lawyer. I don't know that that's the reason, but I think part of the reason we get more prescriptive is because that's what our legal system wants or supports or works well with. And I think that's an evolutionary thing. It's not like you flip a switch and from now on we're going to be better this way. I think that's just how it's developed. If there's ambiguity in the standard, it's going to be hard to enforce in this country. So we have a tendency to move toward more specific sorts of things than the more generic or goal oriented is. I think we tend to move in the opposite direction. Be my sense of it anyway.
Yeah, we're definitely moving more performance-based standards for building construction, more goal-oriented. And they also want to, I mean, we only have one standard left for firefighting, which is specific for firefighting. It's for interior firefighting. It specifies That's the only specific standard we have for firefighting. Nothing
Oh.
exists besides that. And it's about, you know, you have to be 2 firefighters inside. You have to have a certain amount of training, and that's fairly prescriptive. And it's been a not a push, but it's been a poking at it for at least 15 years now, for saying that, can we remove it? Can we remove it? Because basically the workers regulations authority wants to remove it, because the government says, hey, why do you still have prescriptive regulations? Why haven't you moved, you know, get rid of that and replaced it with something performance based? And basically, it's the fire service himself who said, I don't think you can remove that yet. We don't know what's waiting on the other side.
Yeah.
We may not.
Well, good for you, because that's you know, there needs to be bright lines somewhere. You know, I'm okay with the, you know, the more goal oriented stuff, and that I am, because especially in the age we live in, that we grew up in. This is not something new, but I mean, things change so fast. Technologies evolve so fast. If you're too prescriptive, you're just not going to be able to keep up. But I also believe there needs to be some bright lines somewhere. And I think that's to the benefit of the people that are impacted by these standards, right? If they're too ambiguous, you know, how do I meet them? You know, it can become difficult to understand what does safe enough mean? You know, there needs to be some benchmark somewhere, you know, some minimum.
Also, it might be the other way. So should you get out of jail free card? Because if you, we meet the minimum standard, why would we make anything more?
Right.
Because we
that happens all the time.
Yeah.
The builders do that all the time here, right there. Well, it meets the letter of the law. I'm done.
Yeah, and it's very hard to, you know, and like it is in the fire service, it's a carpenter. Like, why would a politician pay more? Like, exactly. Why would it pay more? Saying, okay, but you have firefighter 1, and like now you're a firefighter. Like, why would you need 50 hours more or 100 hours more?
You know, the push we're trying to make here, we've done this in some aspects in Illinois with our state fire academy. And I think it's a good thing for the fire service in general to think about. We historically, at least in the U.S., we've been reasonably good at certifying people.
Yeah.
And it's great, but now we got to be good at qualifying them. Yeah. And the model that we're imitating, or trying to imitate here in Illinois, is a military model, because they tend to be better at that than we are, right? They have the minimum requirement. Okay, if you're going to be an officer in the Marine Corps, you have to go to officer candidate school. All right. So you go to officer candidate school and you meet the minimum requirement. Now they make you an officer. And in the fire service, you're done then, right? You met the minimum requirement. I made you an officer. Go be an officer.
Yeah.
And then we'll give you continuing ed and stuff like that. The Marine Corps sends them back to school right away.
Yeah.
Okay, you qualified. You got the stripe. All right, now we're going to teach you how to do it. Now we're going to qualify, right? And it's actually more intensive training than it is to get certified, if you will. And I think we can emulate that to our benefit in a lot of ways, right? So you've met the minimum standard, fine. Now, how do we get your performance level? You know, how do you qualify now? How do you become a good performing officer or even firefighter, right? And I think if we took that approach a little more often, we'd find ourselves, because it shapes the way you develop the curriculum. Right? It's not about meeting the standard anymore. It's about making that standard come to life. It's about actually applying those things in a productive way to make a difference in behaviors or outcomes. And that's a whole different approach to training than meet the minimum standard, right? Answer the right questions for the test, hit the benchmarks. All those things are fine and good in their own way, but it doesn't make you what it is you set out to be, right?
I mean, in my perspective, it seems to be like, I mean, it's, the certifications tend to be fairly like the minimum standard, but they tend to be where it's fairly easy to write the questions or make the practical test. So how fast you raise a ladder, that's an easy test. So let's bring that in. How you know, like, you know, is oxygen to the fire good in this occasion? You know, it's yes and no answers, but as soon as we get into the the typical, what would you do in this situation? How do you interpret risk in this factor? How do you balance risk versus reward in this situation? When you go into this, that's very hard to write a test on it. And
right. There's no objective standard for that.
No.
Right.
And then since that's hard, you tend to not involve those things in the testing. Sure. So you test for the easiest things that might be important, but also a lot of times they're just there because they were easy to test, not necessarily important.
Well, it's for us, it has a lot to do with what's defensible. And we don't like to admit this, but it has to be defensible, right? If somebody challenges your testing process, you have to be able to defend it. And the more objective criteria are the easiest ones to defend, right? Time, sequence, correct answer, wrong answer, yes, no, those sorts of things. So that's where you naturally gravitate to, because you can defend it in a court of law. Yeah. If you can't defend it, then you might find yourself between a rock and a hard place. If somebody challenges you. So I think that there's a tendency for the bureaucracies to move in that direction because that's what's defensible, right? They don't want all their work to go to waste, be overturned by a judge, and so I think that's part of why you see that more objective testing and the avoidance of the other things, which is, as you pointed out, equally as important, probably more important. So how do you the challenge then is, okay, how do you get to that stuff, right? Okay, so now you've met the objective standard, you're certified. Let's start working on qualifying you, on turning you into this thing that you certified yourself to be.
And by then we reach two very delicate problems. One, which is we need instructors that are better than the minimum standard, and let's hope we get to that. The other one is just again, you have to justify that to someone, usually the one with the money. Then you're left with, okay, so how do I justify going above, for instance, a minimum standard, which has a lot of problems. Like to give you an example, we in my previous department, and we wanted to measure performance on ongoing training, like for firefighters. Okay. And in the easy ways and try hard ways, like because it was about self-critique, like for the individuals. Of course, it was about measuring between departments of who's performing where and how. It was about, of course, setting a benchmark for like what's acceptable or not. It was a lot of reasons, of course, what you want to measure. But the fire chiefs in that area was very reluctant to make that happen. They didn't want to really measure because, and they were at least some of them frank with it and saying that, well, if some of our department members who've been firefighters for 50 years, if they don't meet the standards, whatever standards you set and so on, what do we do then? Like, what do we do then? Is that, and how much is that going to cost us for training them extra? Is that even possible? What happens if they don't really feel like training extra because they're already employed, and it's really hard to sack a person, at least in Sweden and so on. Sure. So if we start to measure, we might not like what we get. Like we don't really like especially if we set up minimum criteria, because we don't know how much that's going to cost. But even measuring without setting a minimum standard, we might get results that we don't like. So let's not just measure. Yes. But that goes directly against whatever the fire chiefs in that region tried to do, which was about measuring things on the department level and trying to justify, for instance, more training or added staff or everything for the politicians. So how do you think about this problem with how do we justify training? How do we justify raising minimum standards in all those aspects of doing it? I know it's a hard question, but at least like you can start somewhere.
I wouldn't have to spend my time talking to you if I had to answer.
That's the meat sauce. That's important. Yeah.
It's the proverbial challenge, right? Yeah. And our experience here in the U.S., as you know, is really no different than yours in Sweden. Yeah. You have all those same challenges. Yeah. The approach that I've personally taken in my career and in my life has been to work with the individuals and the organizations to say, to rise above this, right? What did you say you were going to do, and who did you say you were going to be, and how do you best manifest yourself? Yeah. How do you come to work each day and be the best you can possibly be? Do you really want to do that? Hopefully, yes. Okay, doing these things will help you get there, right? Become a high performer, and it's not going to reach everybody. It's not going to reach every fire chief. It's not going to reach every politician. But it can be more successful than you might think. I had some, after I had my career with Chicago, I came out to a suburb northwest of the city. I spent 6 years in Algonquin-Lake in the Hills Fire Protection District. And we actually passed our only revenue comes from real estate taxes for our fire district. We're not a municipal department. We're a separate district. And we passed a tax increase during the same election cycle that Donald Trump got elected in a Republican district, right? Which should have been impossible to do. Yeah. But we did it because we tried, because we made that effort to say, look, folks, we've already made the cuts. We've already done what we can do. Here's the evidence for that. And we're not going to be able to keep up the performance level if we don't have more money. This is just, and the folks, the people, right? Because it does often come down to money, right? Where do you get the money to do this? And they voted to increase their own taxes, right? And to raise their contribution to the fire district through their real estate taxes, because we made a compelling case, right?
Yeah, but how much of that is up to the smooth talking of whoever is selling that to the and how much is up to like, this is the data, this is whatever we can show that shows that X amount of money goes into training and Y amount of that saved lives or saved property. Like
so it's really, I don't think the dichotomy is between smooth talking and data. I think is getting the data, understanding it, and then having somebody that knows how to sell that data, right? To make the translation. And that's something that the fire service is terribly bad at least here. And the police departments in the United States are really good at that, comparatively speaking. They take those crime stats, which sometimes, in my opinion, are just meaningless, but they know how to message that to the people, right? Crime is up, therefore we need more police. Well, more police aren't going to necessarily reduce the crime, but they've managed to sell that message. And I'm way oversimplifying it, and I apologize to all the police officers that are going to get upset about that. But they understand that there's a grain of truth in all that, right? Is that you have to know how to sell the message. If you really need more cops, if you really need more firefighters, if you really need more training, then it's our responsibility to figure out to first off get the data, understand that it's out there, it's available to you, learn how to use it, and then learn how to turn that into a message, right? And the way we did it here locally, it's a very limited example, but I had two choices about how I wanted to implement my service reduction, right? One way would just to be reduced manpower, but people driving by the fire station would never know that there's less firefighters there. The other choice I had, which is a much more difficult choice, and it wasn't mine alone, but the other choice, close a firehouse, right? Close a fire station, shutter it, right? And so that's the way we sold the message, right? Is that you're going to have less firefighters, and that could mean that this fire station is going to close, right? So your fire station, the one that you drive by every day, won't be there anymore. That's very real compared to, well, there'll be too fewer firefighters in the fire station. Nobody really, they won't see that, but they'll see the plywood on the windows when we close it, right? So it becomes a matter of how do you implement this? And we had the data to support that, right? Yeah. And what would that do to response times? And what does that do, even if I keep it open, but there's only one person to drive, and so you can collect that data, but the fire service, at least here, really doesn't understand how to use data, especially big data. And we got to wake up and start learning. I mean, and it's starting to change. The big cities, some of them are starting to learn. New York's really good at it. Philadelphia is good. There's California in general is good at that kind of stuff because they've had to do it with the wildland problems. But the fire service as a whole has no clue how to use run statistics or response times and all that kind of stuff in an effective way. And we need to get better at that, because that's how you craft the message that people will understand and respond to. And I think we have to understand that that's our job is to, if this is important, it's up to us to craft the message in a way that people can understand that. You know, saying firefighters need more training, otherwise people are going to die. You know, man, that's a big bridge to cross. You know, you got to
Yeah,
do
you
better.
could always argue that you need more training in that with that.
Sure, you know, we might intuitively understand that that's truth,
Yeah.
but you can't expect a civilian to understand it. That's not they got busy lives. They got other things, right? It's our job to make that connection for them.
Yeah, so there's also no ends argument. Like you could always, okay, now you get $100, so I need more because we will do better.
Yeah.
I need more
Right.
because we'll do better. I need more.
Sure.
Like what's good enough? That's
Right.
like that. But no, so that's the high level stuff. Like if I'm a fire instructor, and you know, like I don't see politicians. I just go, I just want to make better firefighters, and so it's the same thing. To be like, if I ask you, how do I as an individual fire instructor go to my boss and say, hey, Lisa it's not working, like she's not up to task, or Steven, he does not pull a ladder. Like how do I as an instructor try to raise the bar at the department at that level? Like how do I work that without being the one who always comes to complaining at people, and eventually the boss is going to be tired of about you're just standards are too high, you don't like people or whatever it might be. Like how do I be like,
this is risky. I'll tell you what I think, but I want to preface it by saying it's risky because it's going to vary in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
I'm just going to share my experience, right? The first thing that I learned to do, if I had an instructor come to me and say, you know, so-and-so is not up to, I want to see the information. I want to see the training records, right? I want to make sure that you're actually spending the time that you say you're doing, because a lot of times we fail our employees because we set up the training and we said they were supposed to do it. We assume it's going to happen, and if they didn't, then it's their fault. We get into this. We let people slip through the cracks without making the extra effort, right? Yeah. So first, I'm going to want to see, are they slipping through the cracks? You know, and then if they are, well, did you make the extra effort? And I think you owe that to people to fix that problem. So I'm going to want to know, well, what did you do? You know, when you recognize that they weren't performing, what did you do to help them make it up, right? Or did you just tell them they had to work harder or whatever? Okay. Yeah. So were you applying effective remediation, right, to this employee? And then, okay, let's do a performance improvement plan. Let's map out, and you sit down with the employee and you say, okay, this is the deficiency we recognize, and here's the goal, and you're going to help us, right? And when it works really good, right? Is you get the employee to tell you, this is what I need, this is where I'm slipping, this, you know, and oftentimes we don't do that until we're getting ready to fire somebody. Yeah. But if you do it earlier in the process, you can often save somebody, right? Yeah. You get them involved in their own improvement. And then the other part that helps you do is when it really is a performance issue, that employee has identified, yes, this is my performance problem. I agree that these are the steps that we're going to take. And then if they don't meet those requirements, well, now I, as the fire chief or the supervisor, now I'm at least in a position where I have grounds to discipline that employee if I choose that that's the route we have to go. But we so often, at least my admittedly limited experience, is we skip those intermediate steps. We want to go right from, well, we tried, or we gave them, we told them to do this, we showed them how to do it, to discipline and discharge. We want to skip all those intermediate steps. And if you skip those intermediate steps, you don't have a leg to stand on. And so now everybody's getting upset and pissed off at one another and filing grievances and doing all this other nonsense. If you pay attention to that, you remember Alan Brunin Sr., you know Alan, right? And the man was a genius in so many ways. And one of the things he said that I thought just really resonated with me, one of the many, he says, what do you call that employee that just meets the minimum standard, barely gets to work on time, only does what you tell them to do, And in the fire service, we want to call those people mutts, or, we don't like them. We want all high performers, right? Yeah. And he would just smile and shake his head. And he says, no, you call them employees. Because that's the middle of the bell curve. That's what most people are. Most people are only going to meet the minimum. And if you want them to meet something besides the minimum, now it's up to you. Don't tell them it's up to them. That ain't going to do it. That's the reason there's a bell curve, is because most people won't do that. So it's your job to get that middle of the bell curve. That's why I have supervisors. That's why I have instructors, right? And then that back end of the bell curve, those are the folks that you really did try to help and they refused to do it. Okay, now we can do something with them. But I think it's that failure to recognize that and I think part of it is, Lars, when you become an instructor, when you become an officer, when you are successful in your career, this career or any other, you are almost by definition at the front end of that bell curve, right? So that's who and what you are. And you tend to want to be everybody else to be like you, right? And if they can't do it the way you did it, then they must be deficient somehow. And what Brunancini was telling us is, no, they're not deficient. They're normal. You're abnormal. You're above normal. They're normal. You've got to find a way to help normal succeed. That's your job as an instructor. You know, get normal to succeed. And I think where we run into a problem is oftentimes we look at normal as abnormal.
Yeah.
Or below grade, right? And so we don't want to make the effort that's really required. So the first thing I would say is make sure that we're doing our part, right? Make sure we're not taking shortcuts. We're not, expecting them to meet some higher standard that we don't have any truly justifiable reason to expect, right? Most employees, most people in any profession require extra effort just to maintain minimum standards. And we have to accept that that's part of what we have to deal with. Just reality. End of rant. Yeah. Sorry, I got on my high.
No, that's great. I mean, two things I want to add on. Or first off, what I hear you saying is, if you're in a structure and you think that someone is not performing, come prepared. Meaning,
yeah,
you can't just go complain. You just go like, have you actually done your part, which is coaching that person? And if that doesn't fail, it leads me to the second one. And I had this when I remember I sat as a fairly new instructor. I was sitting there, but with other instructors, we had meetings and so on. And it was also always someone that go like, oh, that person is useless, and that person is worthless. And they did a drill and they didn't understand, or like they're stupid because they didn't understand the drill. They didn't interpret the scenario correctly and so on. And I fairly early recognized that like there's a lot of blaming here for what could be, not saying it is always, but it could be a failure, of course, on the instructor's part. Sure. Did we create a scenario which was interpretable in the right way? Did we create a level of training which was appropriate for that individual, that team? Like, did we put the bar up here and they were down here? That's not fair. You can't so there was it's fairly early. I realized that we had and we still have a problem of that, which is it my fault as an instructor if the student fails of what I said them to do, or is it the student's fault? And if you have any other direction than it's your fault, I think we have a problem. Because as an instructor, one of the things is for me is to deliver the information or the content or the training, whatever it might be. It's also to set the training at a level which is appropriate for the student. Yeah. Like if you have most people failing, you didn't do a very good job at training.
Something's wrong. Right?
Something's wrong, and I think that's where I started. But that's a very hard one to go because you don't want to. Instructors are delicate. At least it's like, but it's hard to get good instructors. It's hard to not them quit. They are often, like you say, they're maybe strong-willed because they think they're good, and they might be good also, which is a double problem. Yeah, because when you want to talk to them, saying that hey, might not be their problem, might be your problem. That's a delicate discussion to have, and I found that, at least when I started this, because I was a junior, when I started to poke that box was not ready to be opened. On that level, and saying that, hey, I think we need to be self-critical about the training we provide if the students.
I had a really good mentor when I was in my teens, and this is before I got in the fire service, as an instructor in a youth activity I was in, and he said, okay, so if to be good, you have to understand two things. One, or you have to accomplish two things. One, you got to get them to believe that their performance is 100% their responsibility. Yeah. They have to do it. You can't do it for them. They have to do it, and they really have to believe that it's 100% their responsibility. At the same time, you have to understand as their instructor that it's 100% your responsibility.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to do this. You're the
Yeah.
instructor because you know how to do this,
Yeah.
right? So you got to keep that from them, but understand, so what he was teaching me, and I didn't fully get it at the time, was that this is an ongoing process, right? This is just this continuum that you always have to work on, right? You always have to find a way to convince that student that this is up to you, man. Your performance is totally 100% your responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm here to guide you and shape you and all that. But at the same time, you just have to accept, and there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief here, right? Because you can't literally be responsible for somebody else's behavior, but you have to train, you have to prepare yourself as the instructor as if it is, right?
Yeah.
If your effort has to be such that you have to believe you can transform this person. I'm going to work that hard to transform this thing, right? No matter how stupid they are, right? I'm going to fix it, right? So if you're working that hard, and if they're working that sincerely, then you'll probably get there. I think was what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
But you need both. You can't have this.
No,
It's not if then, or it's not based on an individual. Treat everybody this way. They all need you, and they have to be convinced that it's 100% their responsibility. So I had that very early on, and he meant it, and he held me to it. Yeah. And I certainly didn't master it to this day, but at least I had that goal very, very early in even before my career in the fire service, and that made a big, big difference for me.
Have you of course Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard when he talks about safety third?
Yes. Yes.
So I mean because I interpret that as the same thing. Like what if I look at safety, I have a problem with, because a lot of safety time. So to frame it in a story, not to do storytelling, but to give context. I had an instructor from another country coming to Sweden, and in the live fire training facility there was a gap between different floors. It was like a decimeter in 3 inches, a small step between the levels of 2 containers.
Yeah.
And he went in there and he tripped down that small step, and he sort of twisted an ankle or something. He said, well, he was almost pissed off when he came out. Like, you can't do that. Like, that's grounds for, that's dangerous. That's a grounds for like stopping training and everything. I go like, I had 2 issues with that. Like, first off was if you don't train in the way that in that case you're on your hands and knees when you can't see anything, that's a problem with that. You have to have an environment that allows you to train to avoid those kind of trip hazards. Otherwise, you're just going to have them when you're out doing the actual fire, because not every floor is level. So we can't build away all the risks that exist in a training, because if we can't simulate them, at least, because there's
no point.
You'll face them in reality. But I think the other one, for me, was safety third, which for me was a great revelation when he talked about it, because he's so eloquent. Was that because it's exactly what you said about training. If we as an organization say that everything should be safe, that of course is good. We should try to be as safe as possible. Nobody should get killed or not even lightly wounded is the objective of the organization.
Sure.
But if I communicate that to the students and they say, this is facility here, it's built so that whatever you do, you will never get hurt. And the instructors know it. The students know it. You have taken away all the responsibility of the instructor to make it safe. And you've taken away all the engagement and the responsibility of the self-ownership of that process of making it safe for the students. Now, ideally, you would have an organization that builds a training facility and instructors that are safe. But what you communicate to even the instructors is that if you fuck this training up, someone is going to die. And they go like, oh, holy shit, I need to like step up the game here. Otherwise someone dies. And they will communicate that to students, go like, if you go into this container and you don't follow what we've told you and do this with an nozzle, someone will get badly injured. Do you understand? And people go like, oh, holy shit, I need to study. I need to do this.
Get their attention.
Get your attention. So that's the same duality here, that it should be entirely safe, but people should believe that it's, oh my God, everybody's going to die. Then you achieve safety.
Sure. I think it's this, Jocko Willink.
Yeah.
Have you heard of him? All right. So, he has the extreme ownership.
Extreme ownership. Yeah. Yeah.
Angle. And I think there's a very similar thing, right? Is that, bad things can happen, accidents can happen and all that. But if you start with the assumption that you own it, that you're responsible for it, that it's not failure is not acceptable. And you really have to believe that, even though it can't be objectively true, you have to convince yourself that it's achievable. Otherwise, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, but why should you try if you don't even believe it's possible?
Right.
Training. Why would you worry about safety if you know it's absolutely safe?
Right. Or even if the flip side of that, Lars, is if you knew that death and injury is inevitable, oh, well, it's going to happen anyway, so it doesn't matter what.
Absolutely. You have to be confident that you're able to control the environment too.
Right. And
so I think that's in your hands. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the larger point of Micro's safety third is that there are more important things in terms of there are things that are more that you can have more impact over, right? Take responsibility for. If you accept responsibility for these things, safety will tend to take care of itself.
Yeah. If you are good, for instance, if you're good at what you do in your job, your safety tends to be follow the that natural progression. It's sort of like it might be. This might not be true, but it might be true that Sweden has a history of the basics being fire behavior and at least partially building construction, but definitely fire behavior on firefighters. So having that basic knowledge may be the reason we didn't kill or haven't killed anyone in training, seriously injured people in training, even though we use diesel and we have synthetic furniture. We never pre-cut holes. We don't board up windows like some Fort North 3 would do required. We could do basically whatever we like, but maybe the reason we didn't because we're good at fire behavior, so we didn't do the obviously bad things that you would otherwise have to write a standard for. Like do this, cut this hole, cut this. I don't know why you should cut this hole, but I should cut the hole. I don't know why we can't be two people here, but we can't. Like it becomes a checklist instead of actually understanding the risk.
Right. And I think that I have to be careful too, but I'll say you might be onto something, right?
I don't know, but again, laws of statistics, we have a small country. Sure. We may just be lucky.
No, I don't think you're just lucky. If you look at, in all seriousness, it's if you look at, and dare I say, the medical profession, just in the broadest sense, right? Yeah. There's nobody that says that the incision must be made starting at this location and move just so far to this location, and then it must stop, right? Yeah. But they invest. If you're going to get a medical degree, you invest an enormous amount of time in the fundamentals, the whys of your profession, right? And I tend to agree with you. I think that that's a better approach. If we focused more on this is why you do the things you do, and less on the steps, do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think we might have better outcomes. But it's a risky proposition.
I think it's still. I think there is a balance here. If you go too far on the why, you tend to leave all the interpretation of the how to the individual, and that creates a whole host of problems. Also, now I think the ideal is that you teach people why, and then you give them the baseline. Sort of, if you do it like this, most of the times it works. But like, here's the outliers. This is the place where it won't work. If you just give them how, I think it's a problem. If you just give them the why, I think it's a problem. We sort of have to simplify the how anyway, and also for interoperability. I don't know what the word is, but like to be able to work with others. Like if you, okay, you're going to do it that way, I'm going to do it that way, and you're going to do it that way. Everyone's on the same why, but we can't work together. We can't communicate and so on.
That's what I mean by bright lines, right? There are certain things that you have to have. All right, when we get here, this is the way it's got to be. And it might just be an interoperability issue, right? Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do this, but if we're going to have these different jurisdictions working together, we have to come to a consensus that this is the way we're going to do it. and we all agree to do those things, and and reasonable people do those things, because in the end, it makes it all work better for all of us, right? So that having those bright lines here and there are fine, but generally speaking, I think we're better off with if we have people that understand why they're supposed to do what they're supposed to do. They're more likely to do it, and they're more likely to do it in the most effective and safest, if you will, possible way, because they have all options open to them, right? Yeah. Everything that they bring in not just their training and their experience, but their entire lives, they bring to this thing. My generation, to some extent, of firefighters, and certainly my dad's generation, were all tradespeople, right? They were carpenters and plumbers and electricians, and that's how they were trained, and that's what their side jobs were. And they brought that knowledge and experience to the fire station every single day. And that was important knowledge and experience. We don't have that anymore. Yeah. The firefighters aren't tradesmen, and their parents weren't tradesmen. So they don't have this intuitive understanding of how things are put together and how they come apart and how tools work and all that kind of stuff. So having all that extra knowledge helped those guys make, let's just, for the sake of this discussion, safe decisions, right? Yeah. They intuitively understood this is the proper way to use a tool. This isn't. They didn't have to be taught step-by-step safety procedures for a saw, because that's what they use their entire lives from the time, right? So I think that's part of the why. It's not just the theory, right? It's the experience is part of that why too. This is what works and this is what doesn't work. There's the psychomotor skill part of it is part of that why, and all those things are important. And like you said, we're finding that balance, that's why we have instructors. That's why we have that's why we have consensus standard processes, right? To bring to bring all those people together to come up with something. So, it's slow, it's laborious, it doesn't always work. It's fraught with shortcomings and inefficiencies. But if you got a better system, bring it on.
Well, dictatorships works if the dictator is very nice and knowledgeable. But
until power corrupts.
Until power corrupts, power absolutely corrupts. So I think I mean it's like democracy. It's messy, but sort of the best things that we have. And I want to go back to the thing with the instructor and about. So if story you talked about the carpenter. When I joined the part-time, I've been a full-time firefighter, and then I joined the part-time station, and it was funny because one of the first calls I went to was it was a fire, and there was one of my colleagues at the part-time station who he was furious after the fire because he was sitting in the sauna, and we were discussing the fire. He was furious because he was up on the roof, and the guy from the full-time station, which came a little bit later then, but it was instructing what he could and could not do on the roof, and on the aerial platform, and my part-time colleague was furious because he's like, I've been working on the roof as a roofer for 25 years, and this kid, 25 years old, is coming to me and telling me what I can and cannot do on the roof. Because
I have a version of that story. So my version of the story is with I was I was in a fire station with an engine company and a truck company. Yeah. Okay. We separate those things generally in the US, and I'm assigned to the truck company. Well, my officer assigned two guys from the engine company, basically were supposed to make sure that I understood ladder work. Well, you would think that ladder work was the domain of the truck company. Well, these two guys were house painters on their side job, right? Yeah. So they were throwing ladders all day long, painting the exterior of houses, right? Yeah. This is something that they did day in and day out for the last 25 years. Yeah. If you're going to learn how to raise a ground ladder, learn it from a guy that's doing it, 8 hours a day, that kind of thing. But we sometimes think that our narrow experience within the fire service is the end all and be all. And you lose sight of that. then that's how the safety first ends up dominating the discussion, right? Because you really, if who really understands what ladder safety is or roof safety is a roofer. A guy that's up there every single day, he understands what the hazards of being on a roof are more than any firefighter will ever understand. And yes, the fire environment makes it a little different, but 90% of the roof hazards that a firefighter encounters are inherent hazards being up on a roof, right? So talk to the roofer. Don't talk to the guy that's been up there. I don't care how many years you got on the job.
No.
Any apprentice roofer's got more time on a roof than you do, and it would be smart if we could learn to appreciate that again. I think we did once, and many of us still do. But I think if we could relearn that appreciation for those fundamental things, it would serve us well.
I think that, I mean, the Swedish, I think a lot of countries has gone this similar path that to try to make the fire service more into I think the American white collar job rather than a blue collar job, a little bit more academic and so on. A lot of those changes I think are good. I think it opened up a lot of things like being more professional and making sure it's sense, and there's a lot of things that's connected to bureaucracy, for lack of better words, but still important. But in Sweden, I mean, it's also, I mean, in Sweden, you apply after high school or college and to 2-year program, having no carpenter skills, and then you apply for fire service. And again, you can come out there ideally with a good sense of how to do interior tack, but you have never seen a screwdriver. There's this and all what's lacks, for instance, if you had a carpenter background. So I think it is a problematic approach to saying that since the fire service, at least firefighting, is still a very practical job, if we only have people with no for instance handy, what do you call it, handy person what do you call it, carpenter, painter, and all those kinds of trades,
physical skills.
If you don't have if you don't have any people with those skills in your department, I think you're going to struggle at maintaining a safe but also efficient operation.
I think something that an aspect of that, at least my little corner of the world, that we sometimes underappreciate, is that in some ways we're a victim of our own success in terms of our employment, right? So my dad's generation of firefighters remained. I mean, they a variety of reasons why they came from the trades, but they stayed in the trades because they had no choice. They couldn't raise their families if they weren't working second jobs, and those jobs were in the trades at the time. So that's where they worked. With the improvement in our wages and benefits packages and stuff like that, guys really don't need, in a lot of cases, don't really need to work that second job, and so, or it can become much more optional. So they don't have that driving them. My dad didn't work in the trades because he wanted to. He didn't have any choice, and he did it to himself. He had 9 kids, so But
I do. Yeah. That's a lot.
But really, he had no choice. He had to work on his off days, right? Yeah. And so that helped him maintain that skill, and that was all fine and good. And that was true for most of his peers, right? They were working those second jobs because that's how they raised their families, in a decent way. And that it's not meant to be an excuse, but we just got to recognize, at least, for my little corner of the world, is that I think a lot of our training curriculums, a lot of our education, a lot of our mindset still assumes that all of that knowledge and skill comes walking into the firehouse every morning. Yeah. And it doesn't. Yeah. And we haven't changed our training curriculums to make up for that. Where's the section of the book on carpentry skills or just on tools and equipment skills, or on those sorts of things. We just assume that that's all going to be taken care of somehow, and that people are going to know righty tighty, lefty loosey, and and I mean, you hear it all the time. Yeah. At least I did my career. Well, everybody should know that, right? Everybody should know how to do that. Well, no, everybody because you and everybody on your block knew how to do that. That's great, but that doesn't mean that in the whole wide world everybody knows how to do that. Take the time to teach the guy how to do that. right? And then, and if it fails then, well, then okay. But don't, anytime some instructor or an officer would tell me, well, they should know how to do that. Says who? You didn't raise this kid. That's,
So
that wasn't.
I think it's very important, and we have the same time in Sweden. We had like for building construction, you go like, well, this is oh, this is the English word. I don't know. This is the space between the floors. What do you call it?
Yeah. Sure.
Anyway, and you go, hey, your name for it, and call it. It still applies that you know what that name is before you even start the program. Like you go like, no, you have to go back and so go like, this is a house, this is a wall, this is another type of wall. Let's talk about what a wall is made of. It is, but it is. I mean, if you talk about like this, we had in our station we had some problems. People were like didn't know how to change the chain of the chainsaw and stuff like that. This more practical things that you would know if you worked in the woods or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or like on the reciprocating saw, don't know how to switch the blade and so on.
Yeah.
So we had to we had an obstacle course we did for a physical PT, but we made that into like all these stations where you had to do something on the job also. So you would run to the saw and change the blade, and you would jump so you had to start doing this regular, because it's not something you can read on a PowerPoint and then do it once and then never do it again for 2 years. These are the small practical things, like knowing how to change a bit on a screwdriver or so on. You have to do them like every other month or 4 times a year.
Another thing that I think we underestimate as instructors, if you have those skills, right? If you grew up with those skills, you don't remember having to learn that, right? It's just something you learn, right? So we forget how much effort it takes to learn how to swing a sledgehammer, or to change, something. What do you mean it's different? You can't remember how to do this. Well, you did it 1,000 times as a kid before you were even thinking about it, or something like that, right? Yeah. It takes a lot more effort, physically, mentally, and emotionally, if you're learning this as an adult for the first time, and to retain it. It's much harder than many of us think, right? I mean, and my personal example is, I learned computer, operating a computer very late in my life, and I learned word processing on WordPerfect.
Yeah,
that's what was available to me. That's what most people alive today don't even know what I mean by WordPerfect, right? But it once was a thing. It was word processing software that people actually used, and it was very different than Microsoft Word, right? Yeah. And to this day, I still struggle with Word because it doesn't have the features that I was used to, those limited features, right? I mean, and I'm always going to struggle with that, and to this day, I can learn Excel, and I can learn to do things in Excel, but I can't retain them because I don't do it often enough. I just don't. I don't have to. I have somebody else can do it for me.
You don't want to do it.
I don't want to. So I don't retain those skills. It takes an extraordinary amount of effort for me to retain any kind of computer skills, right? Because I didn't grow up with learning those things. So who the hell am I to expect some kid, some young firefighter that didn't grow up with a parent putting a hammer in their hand or a saw in their hand or whatever it is? What right have I had to expect them to master that with the ease that I think I mastered it, right? I have to recognize that they're going to struggle with that the same way I struggle with Excel. Yeah. And I would get pretty pissed off if somebody told me, well, you learned Excel. I taught you Excel 10 years ago. You should know how to do this. And I'm going to say, no, I forgot, right? Well, how can I, as a fire instructor, say, well, I taught you how to do this 6 months ago or 6 years ago. You should know how to do that. Have I reinforced it? Have I given them opportunities to maintain that skill and improve that skill and master that skill and internalize that skill? Or did I just teach it to them and say, okay, now you know this and walk away from it? That's my responsibility as the instructor, to make sure that they maintain that level of proficiency. I have to keep giving them the challenges and the opportunities, because if I recognize how difficult it is for them to master that, then I recognize that it's not just me as an individual, but the organization, the fire service, has the responsibility. If this is an essential skill that you weren't brought up with, that I'm introducing to you, it's my responsibility to make sure that you maintain proficiency in it. I can't expect you to just do it on your own. Maybe I can, but I'm shooting myself in the foot if that's what I leave it to, because it's not going to happen. I'm not going to maintain any skill with Excel or any other computer program if somebody doesn't make me do it, right? Yeah. As long as I don't have to do it, it's going to slip. So, what do we want?
It's part of building. So I mean, a lot of people who are not carpenters or tradespeople, they don't even like to change this blade on the reciprocating saw,
right?
Because they don't find it interesting. They don't, fires is not very often, and sure. Using a saw is even more rarely on those. So you're going to do it. Yeah. So I mean, you're starting in an uphill battle. If you as an instructor has identified that this is something that we should be able to do, how do you build a culture where people want to train on the things they don't want to train on?
You make it fun. You make it interesting. I mean, it's all the basic psychology, which it's something that, boy, I came into very, very late in my career, how important that is. We should be putting much more very practical psychology into our curriculums for our firefighters and officers and all that. How do people really learn? How do they really understand what's truly important to them? And start talking about that in a frank way very early in our careers and in our development of our personnel would pay big dividends. But because that's what it comes down to, right? I think part of it is recognizing or exploring with that employee, why are you here? Because I think at the core, really, if they are here, I mean, there's always that back end of the bell curve that really, truly just wants the paycheck, right? Yeah. But even the middle of that bell curve might not be high performers, but they want to be firefighters. They want to be part of this thing, okay? Well, part of my job as an instructor is to show them how being part of this thing means being good at changing that blade, right? Yeah. That's part of how you become part of this thing. That's who and what we are.
How do you show that, or how do you do that? Like do you have an example? Like,
that's a good one. I don't know if I have good examples or not.
Let's say it's something else, ladders or whatever. Like, how do you? Yeah. How generically do you show that this is important for you? Like, how do you?
Yeah. I have examples of, the old crusty firefighter that drove the truck when I first came on the job, Rudy Steigerwald. He hated everybody. He lived up to his Germanic surname. I mean, he was just that, so I'll give you an example. So, I think I'm doing my job and I was, as my officer described it to me, by going through the rig every day and taking out the tools and operating them and making sure, right? Well, I took the circular saw, the K12, the roof cutting saw out of it, and I started went to go start the saw. And you would have thought I thought the guy was going to kill me. What are you doing? Who do you think you are? That's my tool. That's not your tool. And in his German way, right? I mean, Rudy he just tore into me, right? Get over on that hand pump, that's your tool, and okay, so he put me in my place, right? Yeah. And then later that afternoon, he just, without saying a word, without explanation, without apologizing or doing anything, he said, "Come here, kid." And he took me in the back and he showed me how to feel strip the saw. And, and there was no, like I said, there was no, okay, I was just joking. No, there was none of that, right? He stayed in character the whole time. Yeah. But by example, he showed me this is important, right? Yeah. And the time will come. This is my job. This is my tool. I'm responsible for it. Yeah. But the time will come when you'll be responsible for it. So you might as well start learning now. Yeah. And he was showing me his pride in the simple things, right? Yeah, he was the senior guy. He was the driver of the truck. He didn't have to check that saw, but that was his primary tool when he got up on that roof. So he was taking responsibility for it. Yeah. Nobody else was going to check that saw but him. Yeah. Right. So, and he wasn't going to risk letting me screw something up while I was teaching right. Yeah. So he was 100% invested in that. And I think if what we want people to learn how to change that blade, how to do this. If it truly is important, if we really understand how important it is, then we can convey that to them, that this is part of how you become a professional. These little things, these little teeny things. It's clean, it's functional, it's where it belongs. And if we can't articulate why that's important and how that ties into you being a professional, high-performing individual, then we've got some learning to do, right? I mean, I'm not there yet. And Rudy, he would not say anything the way I just said it. Rudy was barely, he was barely literate, I think, but he could convey that, right? He just said, he took me in the back and he said, just stand there and shut up and watch.
Yeah.
And he field stripped the whole thing, did whatever it is he did, put it all back together again. Yeah. Didn't say, okay, did you learn anything? But none of that. No interpersonal connection whatsoever. Just stand there, watch what I'm doing, keep your mouth shut. But I got the message, right? Yeah. I got the message. He took that so seriously, that tool so seriously that he would personally every day make sure that it was 100% functional. Now, he didn't just start it. He pulled the thing halfway apart, cleaned everything, whether it needed it or not. And nobody else got the touch, right? Because somebody else might screw it up. He needed to absolutely know that was going to function the way he wanted to function. He took it that seriously, every little detail. And he showed me that by example, not by blah, 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 not in a book, not in a test, just by, conveying to me why he said that morning what he said. And I think we should all have that. Maybe be a little more personable than Rudy was, but we should all have. And if one of the things I convey to instructors or even to officers and even to senior firefighters, if you don't know why you're asking somebody to do something, why it needs to be done this way, man, then you got no business telling them they have to do it, right? You better go figure out the why first and understand what's at the root of what you expect them to do. If cleaning the toilets and mopping the floor and washing the apparatus is important, in a larger sense, you better really be able to understand that yourself before you tell some young kid that that's what they have to do.
Yeah. So. I mean, I totally resonate with what you said, and I remember me as a firefighter, and we had a discussion. I was starting to become an instructor, and I was also instructing officers as a firefighter. I mean, and that. In some parts it could be complicated because there was sort of a, who are you to tell me what I should know? Sure. Because I'm an officer. But anyway, so it was, I remember, it's just an example of a discussion I had about the officer, and we talked, it was operational, but it was we talked about it non-operational, so that, well, you need to check on your firefighters that they're doing what they're supposed to doing. So it's supposed to be doing. You need to make sure that what you ordered is being carried out. Like I was in some form like that. And the officer said, "Well, no, I trust my firefighters. I don't want to check on them because that shows that I don't trust them, and that's very important to me." So he framed it in a way that it was a positive thing, that he didn't check on what they were doing. Yeah. And I tried to explain to him that, well, if you have someone who's not interested in what they're doing, if you don't pay attention what they're doing, like if someone washes the truck and they come to you as an officer and reports, I washed the truck. If you said, good, now you can wash the toilets, you're basically implying that what you just did was not important. Really that important. I'm not even going to check it if it was done properly and so on. Now, if you instead go out and look at the truck, you can even pretend looking at the truck, like going like, oh, good, hum a little bit, and just show that it is so important that you wash the truck. I need to go out and check it and give you a pat on the shoulder if you did it right. And now we can go and do that. And then again, what you showed about enforcing it, and that for me, when I started learning that, because that was not intuitive. That was learned by someone telling me this, and I watched YouTube videos and so on. I didn't have I had YouTube to learn me things. But I think that was critical for me, that like these small things that you set examples on, these are the things that matter, and these are things that do not matter. And as an instructor, you're part of that culture of showing people what matters and what does not, by mostly your actions about what do you pay attention to or not, because that,
when,
that is
when you
really
when you get an opportunity as an officer or an instructor to pat somebody on the back when they didn't see it coming, and you can send the same message, right? You say, hey, I really appreciate that you did XYZ this morning. Most guys don't do that, right? One, he knows you checked.
Yeah.
But you say you checked, you just but you still sent the message, right? And paying attention to what you're doing, and you did a great job, right? Then they're happy that you notice, but they also know that you're paying attention. And you're spot on. People want to know that you're paying attention. People want to know that their effort is appreciated.
Yeah.
And if you don't go and check on them, then you really don't know that they're doing a good job. And you can say good job, guys, but the details are missing, right? Without the details, it's just another hi, how are you? It doesn't mean anything, right?
There was I remember seeing a YouTube video about science experiments. There was like MIT students or whatever it might be, and they were measuring how willing they were to work. And the professor or the who was leading the study, they were signing a paper, doing some kind of test or whatever it might be, and they went forward to the test leader, and the test leader took whatever they've done, like a test, written something, and they just put it through the shredder and asked if they want to do some more work for money. And they measured how much work were they willing to do, how cheap were they willing to make the labor. And they compared to a student where the test leader just took the paper, looked at it for basically 5 seconds, just said, and put it in a pile, neatly folded, and put their name on it. And they saw that, of course, the ones who did the chore, which was useless. It was a useless chore. But the ones who had the test examiner just basically faked the intention, the attention they put into whatever effort they put into the work. They produced more work. A lot more work. So people pay attention to whatever you pay attention to.
Exactly. Even if they're not consciously aware of it.
Oh, absolutely.
The fascinating thing that I learned, it's not that people know that they're responding to this, but they are responding.
Oh, for sure.
So it's worth your effort, whether you get a visible or an immediate positive response from them or not. It's still worth your effort, because all the research, all the studies, again and again and again, and this goes over decades worth of this stuff. People respond positively to your positive reinforcement. We know it works. Don't wait for the reciprocation. Just do it because it's going to pay dividends for you. Absolutely.
I just wish somebody told me that before I sort of quit being an officer. And now I know a lot of things I would have liked to know before I quit full time and so on.
This is the whole qualifying people, not just certifying them, right? Because those are the lessons that are hard to test to. Right. And those are, but those are important lessons that still have to be learned. So after the guy achieves his certification, he's passed the test, he's met the objective standards. It's our responsibility, if we're smart, we'll accept it, is to, let's start teaching the soft skills now, if you will, for lack of a better term. I don't think that's a great term, but that's typically the one. The emotional intelligence stuff, the psychology stuff. This is how you really get things done. This is how you make things work. This is what your people really need out of you. They need you to really give a shit about them. When someone says, hi, how are you? And they say, I'm fine. Again, this is an Alan Brunancini thing, right? You ask somebody, how you doing? What's he going to say? He's going to say, fine. He says, now what do you say? And Alan would say, what you should say is, tell me about fine.
Tell me about,
Right. And really engage them. Don't just say, oh, that's great. How, no, tell me about fine. What does fine mean? Now the guy knows.
Or ask a different question, like what did you do? What did you do today? How was your, what did you do to, early in the shift? Like ask them to actually describe something that has some kind of meaning. That shows you also that you want to know what they did on the previous shift or whatever. Again, I think that I'm not disappointed in the Swedish fire service, but I am saddened by which I think is the same in America, that we I'm not saying that the previous training for officers was good in Sweden, but what happens was that the officer training was slashed, which was provided by the government or the state in the United States.
Yeah.
And it was drilled down to only operational. And before that, it was a lot about being a work leader also, or being a boss. I've never taken that training at all. But just the fact that they slashed all that training just kept the operational, and it was intended that the municipal would catch up the slack.
Yeah.
But they never did because it was minimum basic.
Right.
Why should we pay for anything that we got it from free?
Sure. Yep.
So a lot of that was never taken. And I got a 1-day class of being an officer, basically, besides the operational stuff. I got a 1-day class of being like the fire a circle about these people are a group, group A people, what group B people, whatever it might be. Like super superficial and hardly useful at all. Yeah. It was sort of like, and I think that is a huge mistake that the fire service has made in Sweden, at least. And I think that those call it soft skills. I think that, soft skills, a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of it comes intuitively. Some people are just more open and so on. Some people are more interested. I'm not interested in people per se. Like I'm not a bad boss in that sense. Some people are just naturally interested in people.
Sure.
They will ask, how's your day? And they really want to know for some strange reason. I do not understand why. But I would have liked to understand that I at least have to fake it to be a good
important
officer.
That you make the effort.
Yeah.
I get myself in trouble with this kind of shit because I'm at the end of my career. I'm completely retired now from the fire service, and so I got nobody to answer to in a sense. So I can get away with saying this kind of stuff, but it's the operational stuff that we get so amped up about.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, is pretty easy, right? Compared to the people skills.
Oh yeah.
Right. So we're like, well, you got to get the operational stuff right. That's got to come first. And I having been through all this, I'm like, no, that's the easy part. That'll come easy. That I can do that by imitation. I can do that by mostly. I can do it by imitation, by following the rules, by staying with the SOGs if they're well written. That's what all that is for, right? Is to help me get through the operational stuff. It's much more difficult to write SOGs for personnel management. Yeah. And that's where we need to be investing more of our time, and not just if we wait till the guy gets promoted or becomes an instructor, it's already too late. This has to be part and parcel of how we train firefighters. Right? You're going to spend the rest of your career interacting with people. That's what you really do. What we really do, I don't care where you're at, is we show up. Right? Someone calls 911, says help, and we show up. We don't say, well, what's your, if they can't think of who else to send, who do they send? They send us. Yeah. And so you're going to encounter, right? And you really, and all good firefighters, all good cops too, but all good firefighters, to our point, are just excellent people managers. They know how to manage people, right? And I think we need to more overtly spend time developing those skills, because those are the skills that are the most difficult to master, and that really pay the greatest dividends. Because once you get good at that sort of thing, all aspects of the job, right, that becomes useful knowledge, and whether it's instructor, officer, even as a street level firefighter dealing with the public, right? When you know how to recognize, what people are going through and manage those people, figure out what the real problem is, and convey to them, as you were saying, Lars, in a honest sense that you care, right? You might not be really interested in the details of their day, but you do care that they're taking the time to talk to you. Right. And being able to convey
what you pay attention to. If you pay attention to them, they will pay attention to that.
And you can get anybody to do anything if they really believe that you give a shit about them. And that is true. That is absolutely true. Right. Yeah. That's what friends are about, right? Yeah. When you've got a really good friend, the friend doesn't say, well, what do you need? Well, the friend, what do you need? Whatever it is, I'm there for you, right? Because they really do care about you. So I think, if we're talking about successive instructors, we have to be willing to invest more time and effort in that, right? Is making them more, increasing their emotional intelligence, making them better, their people skills better, helping them do those things. Because somebody that's good at that does it intuitively, they're not going to have these problems, right? It's those of us that struggle with those sorts of those skills. And if we're trying to fix it by making them better, by increasing their technical skill, we're going to continue to fail, right? I think more times than not, if you have an instructor that's failing as an instructor, it's because they're not reading their personnel right. They're not evaluating them correctly. They're not meeting their need, right? They don't really see where the problem is. And a lot of that stuff is just all about how well, how well are you paying attention to what this individual really needs from you? Or are you just giving them the standard curriculum and saying, go get it? And those are difficult things to come to, which is why we tend to gravitate toward the check the box kind of stuff, right? Go through the list. What are you doing? What are you not doing? Look at the evaluation forms, all that kind of stuff. When a lot of times it's just, what I've found in the modern era, if you don't mind me getting on my high horse again, is that, well, we've come to rely so much on email, on text and email, right? These truncated communications that they're just so they're so useful for so many things that we use them all the time. Conveying factual information, maybe, but conveying ideas, conveying understanding, and all that. And there's so many problems can be solved if you just put all the people in the same room where they actually talk to each other, not through some medium, but actually looking at each other in the same room. And oh, yeah, that's what you mean. Oh, okay. Yeah. And we try to solve our problems without that interpersonal contact. I think that's giving, at least, again, my experience in the last few years has been a lot of officers and instructors are failing only because they're not having the interpersonal contact, the true interpersonal contact that they need, that we all need as human beings to actually convey intent and information and all that kind of stuff. We're trying to do everything through text and email.
I think that for sure. I remember. So I'm fairly articulate when I write. I'm fairly good at writing. So I was writing. First off, when I became the training chief or charge of training, I was writing, writing a lot, like emails and PMs and stuff like that. And people were always coming to me or my boss asking about, clarifications and so on. So of course, I had to improve on mine. So I really wanted to keep them short as possible. I knew that was important, but they kept getting longer because I had to make them clear. Like it was, and even if I tried and I looked at wording and so on, like how can I make this clear but still short and so on. So I tried to get better and better. I just realized that when I got to the point where I was clear, people didn't have the energy to read it at all. So I either write it short and they misunderstand and misinterpret it and need more information, or write it long and they don't read it at all. So what I would have liked to do, and which I've had a lot of colleagues done afterwards when I done courses and classes and so on, is that they switch to not. I mean, ideally, you should go and meet everyone and tell them, like you said, they would be the best, but at least make videos, like do weekly morning videos, do a video that explains the exercise they're going to do, because it creates even if you say the same thing as you read, it resonates in a whole different level because you have your personality and so on.
And voice inflection, body language, all that stuff. And video helps with that, but as we're sitting here, we're getting from the shoulders up, right? Oh, yeah. There's a whole lot of body language that's going on with our feet and our hands and all that kind of stuff that gets lost even in the videos. So certainly, anything that involves a visual is an improvement over just the messaging. And then we just can't lose sight of the fact that we're still human beings and we still need that interpersonal contact on a pretty regular basis. You know?
It's just, I mean, like the fire service is naturally hard to make that because there's stations everywhere and there's shifts, like to meet, as an instructor to meet everyone and so on. It's a mess. Like you have to, it takes a month to reach everyone because you have to be there different places, different times, every time. So to have that, I think that's one of the things I think it's very successful at just having that, at least just a talking head. It just, at least people have the energy to listen to that entire talking head rather than the email, which half people just skim through or even just pretend they've never seen.
And with the the way communication has gotten now, I mean, one of the advantages is we're sitting here with each other.
Yeah.
I know when you're paying attention to me and when you're ready to say something, right? I can see that in your body language, right?
Yeah.
So that helps me know that I'm talking too long, or I'm not making my point, or I need to, whatever. And when we're doing it via email, none of that is happening.
No.
So just that much, just being able to see how your audience is responding to what it is you're conveying or try to convey.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
I hope the pandemic is in that sense drive us in the right direction, because
I think it has.
I think there's two things I think is going to be more. People are very aware of what they're missing, like with the physical and the physical meetings and so on. People really aware that there's a vital piece missing that you need. And also, I think we're becoming much better at instead of sending an email, you do an online call or something like that instead of. So it becomes really more. Yeah,
it's really propelled the whole online. What we're doing here. Yeah. Because I think we're all just, at least my corner of the world, we were taking these little baby steps, and we weren't comfortable with the technology, and we were always blaming. But we've just taken big giant steps with that. Everybody's become more comfortable with it, expects it to work. Understands that it's very, very doable, and so that it's all good. I think it's that's for me. That's the silver lining in this whole pandemic has been that the adoption of technologies that were there, but were underused. Yeah. And the advancements those technologies made to meet the increased demand.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's fantastic, and I mean. Sure, and for me, I mean, I consider myself being a technological dude, but I mean, even for
you're going to call yourself a nerd, Lars.
I call, but they're different nerds. but absolutely, but I see it also as. I mean, the efficiency of for me to do everything I do with training, to meetings and discuss what kind of training do we need and so on, instead of going back and forth with emails. I mean, just a short conversation call, it creates a relationship. Sure, it's not physical, but on a whole different level. With the interaction you have, so it's for me, it's especially since I work internationally. Well, at least before the pandemic, it made a huge difference. For me personally, because I wasn't inviting people to do it. I wasn't pushing for it. Now it's become obvious that you start with a sort of like okay, so you're interested in training. Let's have an open discussion first, like a half an hour or hour. Let's see what can I help you with, what you need, and then how instead of going back and forth with emails and like 5 months.
Right. That's something I should learn how to adapt.
Well, it is. It is, but I think also, I mean, there's a whole meetings is just a waste of time thing also, which is sort of, I mean, a lot of meetings are not really meetings. They're just one person conveying a lot of information. So I think that, but if the meeting is a meeting, I think it makes a lot of sense. We have this in our current department. I'm just a part-time firefighter in this department. I do training, and then I'm a part-time firefighter. I'm the lowest ranking. So I don't do anything else. But anyway, so my department I was in started doing weekly meetings with all the station heads, where they would have to be online for a certain time. Yeah. And I was saying that from the start, saying why is the need for everyone to be there at the same time if it's just for instance, the chief of operations going to tell them a lot of things which he could have pre-recorded and people could have watched whenever they liked. Why should people drive down on a Saturday evening to the station, sit there, wait for a certain hour, then watch this if there's no interaction? Like, what's the need for doing that? I think that a lot of those kind of realizations has come about that, like, when do you need a video that's on demand whenever they like, and when do you need a meeting or a video where you need interaction?
You're live.
Yeah. And I mean, for these kind of things, I mean, it's like, wow. Like when there's an interaction, so like you have a questions and you need answers. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Now I had.
by being forced to do this, over the last couple of years, we've all kind of learned, many of us that otherwise would have just avoided it
Yeah.
have learned how to use it and use it more effectively. So, yeah, I think it's going to help us out in the long run.
Silver lining. So it wasn't the isolation that was the silver lining, the not
No,
having to meet people.
I don't know. I kind of enjoyed that.
I'm like I go. Oh, I don't have to meet people. It's
That's
excellent. I can just be home.
yeah, right.
uh, but that gets tiresome in the end. Also, now I want to have because I really want to ask this last one. I would talk a little bit, then I'll let you go about training facilities. When I started going around in America and in 10 years ago or something like that, and already back then, the propane fed live fire training facilities was very common. And with propane fed, I mean the bed on fire with some propane flames, not liquid propane shooting down the hallway. Like there was that, those have started to come around also, but propane flames, theatrical smoke,
Yep.
very clean. You see everything you do and so on. How do you think that? Because my position is very clear. I hate those. I think they're the disgrace for the fire service. I think they build poor firefighters from.
Tell us what you really think there, Lars.
I would like to burn them to the ground. No, no. I
Okay.
mean, they might have a purpose if you have other facilities that do the bulk of training and you just need to repeat something or something. But I know, I think they're horrible. But do you have like like a go around when it comes to live fire training that it's really
So
hard to build facilities? Like, do you have a
yeah,
philosophy? How if you were to like build a facility, do you like have a like this is what I would like to have that
yeah,
ticks all the boxes of?
yeah. Do I have the unlimited budget?
Well, not
uh,
unlimited, but like what if you
yeah,
were to go to a politician and with a clear and honest
yeah,
heart saying, I think this is bang for buck. We need safety. We need
yeah.
efficiency. Like this is a like what do you want and how do you look at
So
that?
so I have a softer approach to the propane. So here's the advantage. There's the I think they fill a niche, and I think if that's here's where, boy, it's kind of hard to get to this. So yeah, there's a lot of problems with them, right? And
Yeah.
and I agree with you, and I think they're self-evident. The one advantage that they do have is sets and reps, right? The
Yeah.
turnaround time. So when you've got to get through a lot of students and you want to get them you want to up the stress level a little bit, the reality a little bit. You're trying to get a little more fidelity in the training, and you've got a lot of students to get through. That helps you do that, right? So there's that little bit of an advantage. And then the other piece of it, there's all kinds of jurisdictions
Yeah.
in my corner of the world where that's the best you're going to get. So if you don't have that, you've got nothing. They're just not going to let you do Class A burns. It's a non-starter, right? So if it's a non-starter, then you need something else to work with.
What is the
And
non-start argument, for instance? Is it
it's an
environmental? Is it
environmental.
hygiene and or
It's mostly environmental.
but so it's
And whether
smoke is smoke pollution in the nearby area?
yeah, it's just and it's not. I mean, they use environmental as the answer. It's more a hygiene thing,
Yeah, hygiene.
right?
Yeah.
They don't want the smoke. They don't want the smell. They don't want and they're just going to say no. We're not going to allow that. And there's all kinds of jurisdictions here where it's just it ain't going to happen. So that's what you're left with.
So if you clean,
And
sorry, if you clean the smoke, if you or at least if you were able to clean the smoke.
if you were able to clean the smoke, then you would have an argument. But who can afford to do that? That gets to be.
Well, it depends on the technology. If you for instance
Yeah.
burn it, it costs a fortune. But if you wash it, I mean we don't have to go into that. But I think they're
That needs to be developed here. I mean, I would just have to say I'm not familiar with that at all.
yeah.
So that speaks to where some advances need to be made by the people that develop those systems to make them more acceptable.
But it's not. I mean, how far has the like in Sweden? It was for a time that it was because of personal hygiene that it was when the scare was on cancer. It was sort of like, oh, we can't even do Class A training, and that I would think that in Sweden it's gone away. Like you could do Class A training. You just have to, you know, don't burn don't burn car tires, and have
Yeah,
proper procedures and wash your
sure.
gear and so on. And
Yeah.
it's
We're
nothing.
going through that now. There's a pretty big push here in the States by some people to ban OSB as a fuel in Class A burns. So yeah,
It makes no sense.
just because, well, whether it makes sense or not, it's ongoing, right? So it's something that and a lot of people are working to bring some sense to the discussion and all that. But you know, something gets legs, right, and starts moving, it gets momentum, and then you're, you know, so there, I think where we've dropped the ball, as trainers in my country, my corner of the world, as a group, is that we haven't done a good job of quantifying why this type of training is important.
It's needed, yeah.
Is needed, right? And I mean, we can say it's needed. We can talk about, well, it's more realistic. Well, what does that mean? Where's the data that supports that more realistic, right? I mean, when they're training pilots, they put them in simulators. They don't put them in airplanes and knock an engine off and say, have at it, kid, right? They put them in a simulator, which is very similar to a plane, but it's not the same as a plane. That's as close as they can, you know, safely, right? But they can justify, right? And we need to be better at, you know, if we're really going to make progress here and have these kinds of facilities and be able to substantiate, you know, we need to do a better job of quantifying why that training is necessary. And I think it's very doable. I think we can do that. But you'll see, and again, I can only speak from my experiences with this, is that you'll see a lot of training organizations, because they have the ability to do the Class A kind of burns, right? And they make it really snotty and really sooty and really hot.
Yeah, I mean,
and they're throwing students in there that are not at all prepared to learn from that environment. They'll get through it, right? And they'll come out with their gear dirty, and they'll, you know, they'll feel some sense of pride and all that, but they haven't learned a freaking thing, because they were shitting their pants the whole time they were in there, or, you know, just trying to get through the evolution. There was no benefit to that student whatsoever, because the student wasn't prepared for that environment. So I think that when we can demonstrate through a series of, okay, you've mastered, you know, the mechanics of the hose lay and the ladder throw and all that, you've mastered it under some stressful situations, limited visibility, raise in temperature, whatever, and then you've demonstrated that you're ready for that live fire environment. Now we're going to put you through that, because there's an extra set of stressors there, and that you'll be able to master that skill, you know, hone that skill a little better. Then it's easier to justify the risks involved and all that kind of stuff, and we'll be better prepared to build and maintain these kind of facilities and burn what we need to burn in them. But if we're just saying that everybody knows that you need to make it hot and dirty and black and sooty, well, really, how did that improve? You know, what did that student come out with? You know, that you couldn't simulate in a safer environment or a cleaner environment or a more repeatable environment. So it's incumbent upon us as the instructors to quantify what those benefits are, demonstrate that the students really do gain some knowledge and skill in those environments, and limit their exposure to when they're ready for that level of training. And I think when we do that a little better, and I don't think it's that big a hurdle, we just got to invest the time and effort to map that all out. Then I think we'll start answering our own questions, or we'll be able to overcome the objectives or objections. The objections to those, because I would agree, and I would take that the next step for us, which is becoming next to impossible in most jurisdictions in the United States, is acquired structures.
Yeah.
Is the requirements for preparing an acquired structure to do a live fire training in many jurisdictions. I mean, if you're off in the hinterland somewhere where nobody's paying attention, you can get away with it. But if you're anywhere near an urban or suburban center, it's next to impossible, because the oversight, it's just so onerous to prepare that building and all that many departments just don't bother with it anymore. We made it so difficult. We made it so difficult to do. I know that in my jurisdiction where I live right now in Algonquin-Lake and Hills, I mean, it's theoretically possible, but even when we had the opportunities, we didn't do it, because I just couldn't muster all the resources necessary to make it worth the effort.
In terms of preparation of the house or the manpower?
Preparation, getting the permits, getting the approvals, the time you'd have to spend with all the local jurisdictions, getting everybody comfortable with the idea that this is what you were going to do.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing is just getting the building. So for us here, typically what happens is somebody decides, that this is a derelict property and they want it gone, right?
Yeah.
So your window is very, very small. They want it, once you got through the course, you get the approval to demolish it. That's like step number one. The building has to be, and then now I've got this 2 or 3 week window before it's got to come down, and that's just not enough time to do all that work. Yeah. So it makes it very, very difficult in a lot of places.
No, I think I'm fortunate. I do a lot of acquired structure burns, and in Sweden it's very easy.
Good for you.
Well, what can I say? I love fire. No, but there's of course, nothing that comes close to acquired structure burns when talked about facility, at least not on that scale. Yeah. And it would be ideal if every firefighter in Sweden, or whatever it might be, like as a grande finale of their like basic training, they experience an acquired structure burn to have that reference point. And I would argue that maybe it should be the grande finale should be somewhere in the middle, because they need those reference points. Then when they go into the simulator to like, why do we do like we do? Because that's the thing. The things that these are the things we have to pretend if it's a bad simulator. That
so let me ask you this, Lars. What about purpose-built buildings? What if we just built?
Yeah, I think they're interesting, and I'd say they're not at all. I mean, when you talk about that, you talk wood framed OSB building, and drywall it, and then
build the house. Just remove the mechanical systems, remove whatever it is you don't absolutely need. Make it modular so you can change it up a little bit. But I mean, that industry already exists.
Yeah.
Right. House. You can order the house online. You can change. I mean, and it has existed for over a century. Right. It went away for a while and it's come back. But I think that might be part of our solution to at least the acquired structure part of it. Right.
Yeah.
Is don't go acquire a structure somewhere. Bring one into your training facility, put it up, and burn it.
Yeah. No, I mean, the only problem I see there is that someone's going to go, oh, it's 4 o'clock, let's go home, and there's a smoldering fire somewhere, and you arrive next morning and it's burnt to the ground. But if you solve that, I think there's a lot of benefits to that, and I haven't seen that. I've seen it in the United States where there's a lot of departments who build those purpose-built, especially to do sort of like research or testing and so on. Yeah. Maybe less for training. But absolutely where, like you build that. Now where I have a problem, it's when you can go to Germany, and I was surprised when I started going to places. I go like, okay, you can have a firefighter who has during the basic training never seen a real fire at all. I mean, not even a propane flame. Like you spraying water on a board painted with flames. And that's enough to become a certified interior firefighter in some places. So I mean, the level of training is so vastly diverse all over the world, and up until like 2000s in a lot of countries in Europe, like seeing a flame during training, it was sort of like that was the exception, not the rule. Sort of.
The NFPA standard requires a live fire. Yeah. Component, and how that how live it's ambiguous enough that some places it might not be much more than a flashover simulator kind of thing or something, but at least there's some verbiage in there that says before you stamp this guy and send him off someplace, he should at least be exposed at least one time to something that's burning. And so it's better than nothing, I suppose, but at least it's there.
But the thing that because Sweden, we built a lot of propane houses in the last couple of years, and it's been out, because of hygiene and environmental reasons, same thing. Yeah. One of the most common things I get when I do acquired structure burns, which is it's extremely sad, but one of the most common things is, but you don't see anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're a firefighter. You've been working as a firefighter for 15 years, and that's the sort of the main takeaway you take away from the acquired structure burns. You can't see anything. And I think that's a sort of Because when I look at like how do you do firefighting? What you need to assess? Okay, what do you need to assess? A lot of things are connected to smoke, like the risk of it. Where is it coming from? How hot is it? Because that of course links to where am I going? Where can I see flows from the thermal imager? Okay, I need to be able to read flows in the thermal imager because that tells me where I'm going, how fast is this going, where I'm going, how effective am I with my stream, how much do I have to stream? Everything is connected to the smoke.
Sure.
And so when you have a propane building, which go like, okay, sure, you can have flames on the table, like that's the easy thing. That's that's the amusement park.
Right.
Like
exactly. All the work is done. Yeah.
All the 80% of the lessons you need to teach a firefighter is always connected to zero visibility and smoke. Sort of like that's where you have the meat of the game. And in propane buildings, that's exactly the thing that you take away. Now, I agree with you that like, is it? I would phrase it like this: is it more fun to train firefighters in an amusement park with flames and theatrical smoke than in a sort of just a empty building with just theatrical smoke? Yes. Is fun important in firefighter training? Yes, it is. I think that's very important. Now, like someone has to pay for that fun, but I mean, we need to keep people motivated and people need to feel that they're badass because that lets us leverage that to become like, okay, you want to be badass? Great. Here's some fire. Let's now change the saw on the blade on the saw 10,000 times. Right. If you leverage that, that's very important. But if that's the only thing you have and firefighters go like, okay, so all the things, and this is of course training scars. Instructors are more or less always training scarred in terms of they start to tweak their training, they start to tweak their instructing based on how their training facility reacts. To make it easier for them, to make it more effective for the students, but they're tweaking it based on how the facility reacts. And that's, if you're not super conscious about that, that's almost inevitable.
Yeah, and you'd be amazed how many instructors that insight has never occurred to them.
Yeah, and
we all do.
I've been one of them.
Yeah, we train to our facilities. Yeah. And it's funny, you can watch it happen so at the University of Illinois, the facility has evolved a lot in recent years.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how the training has evolved to reflect that.
Yeah.
And it's good to see because, and I don't think a lot of people realized how, they were training to their facility.
Yeah.
The evolutions were all, and you would try to, pretend it was something else, but the facility can only do so much, allow you to do so much. And as the facility evolved, the training scenarios evolved. You're spot on. You're absolutely right. And I think most of us are not in the least bit aware of that.
No, and think about it, like the discussion about like fog versus straight stream, or like for cooling. One big aspect of that is that if you're in a compartment where you can see things, you can anticipate how long is my stream reaching and how big is the environment and what can I see and not. I can assess what's happening with the smoke. Fog cooling makes a lot more sense in that respect. If you take away all this visibility, it goes to zero. You can't really anticipate how long you're going to flow for, how long the room is, how much is to cover. You're pretty much going to do this.
Yeah.
And so I think there's like that for a lot of instructors in Europe, there's this sense of we want to be surgical because we think we can be surgical because our training facilities allow us to be surgical.
Yeah.
And then you put them in an environment with like an acquired structure burn and they go like, holy crap, I can't see anything. I don't even know where I can't. I'm always amazed when I sit by the door to the fire compartment and this, I have to look up and go like, I have to bring up my thermal imager because I can't see if there's flames rolling above the ceiling, like a meter, like 3 feet above me. I can't see that there's flames above there. I have to like sit there with a thermal imager, go like, yeah, and now it's rolling out in the ceiling. It's time for like the interior attack to start or something. Like that insight is so important. And I think that again, the whole propane building evolution has brought some good things. I'm saying maybe, but it has for sure.
If I was,
massive
if I was
problems.
allowed to do whatever it is I wanted to do, the only reason I would include the propane would be a means to an end, as an intermediate level sort of Okay, you've demonstrated the basic skills. Now I'm going to have, because the advantage for me, when you can, when the student can see, that also means I can see the student, right?
Yeah.
So I'm upping the stress level a little bit, but I can keep better control of what's going on and all that. And it's, and then the sets and reps, right? To me, there's some value in that as as a training organization, being able to get through those things. But I agree with you. There's so many problems with that, or potential problems with it, that if that's where it ends, or even if that's where it mostly ends, then that's an issue. That you've got to see that as a means to an end. We're going to do this because it's a little more realistic, or it adds a little bit of a stressor that I can't get you otherwise, and I'm prepping you for this more realistic thing that I'm going to do down the road.
I mean, to
then
me,
I think
it's almost like if you do that in propane building, I mean, the level from that would be, let's take away the propane building just to put a cover over your face. Now you see nothing. That's if you don't have a Class A building, that's the grand finale. Because that makes everything much more complicated, and you don't need the bells and whistles and so on, because they can't see it anyway. But also repeatability. I think that's an important path, and I think that's been. If I were to guess in Sweden, I think the biggest driver behind getting propane has been the instructors themselves, because they're lazy and they want to have a push button. That pushes the fire, and it's been heavily enforced by the budget behind it, because we can do more firefighters in shorter time. That sounds like an awesome idea, even though the facility may be more expensive, for instance. So it's been nobody's really been against it, besides those who have said, well, are we really building the best firefighters we could? Because that was not really one of the main issues of going for propane. It was environmental. It was ease of use. It was repeatability. It was getting people through the system.
Everything but the learning environment.
Yeah, it was like, so are we building great firefighters? People go like, yeah, I don't know. like that's just been one of the top concerns. But I think,
but it does all this other stuff.
Yeah. But I think, for me, I like repeatability and so on. So, when I think about a facility, I try to leverage whatever, what's the great thing with propane? Well, you can light a fire really fast. You can do it, pom, pom, pom. You can get flames very consistently. Great, that's great, but you need still smoke. So you have smoke from Class A, you have fire from propane, for instance, and you get flashovers from liquids, for instance. That can create a very high fidelity, repeatable environment. If you combine those. But I remember I said at IFIW meeting with, and Steve Kerber said, what would you like me to study in the next coming years? And this was I don't know, 8 years ago or something. I don't know. But it wasn't 5, it wasn't 10 thing. But anyway, and I said, get me black, non-toxic training smoke. They get me training smoke that is sort of hot. That would revolutionize everything. If you not poisonous, not just dirty. Dirty's okay. We can wash it and so on. Not poisonous, not environmental damages. Make it heat it up a little bit, and you can make it hot sometimes. Boom, you would have it. Why can't anyone fix that?
Well, you know what? They might just get to that. You're probably aware of how much change is taking place at FSRI.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Kerber's mandate is to grow his little piece of that organization 5 times in 5 years. I mean, that's a lot of growth. And
it's ballooning.
And training fires is a big part of what they're looking at. And I think there's going to be opportunities there to start working on exactly what you're talking about. Is that, can we get to that safer, more repeatable training fire with a higher fidelity? What does fidelity really mean? We get a better understanding of what fidelity really means, because hotter and blacker and sootier isn't necessarily higher fidelity, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So as we better understand when the learning really does take place, and what is a good simulated environment, what does that really look like, then we can start the process of manufacturing the prop, right? That'll produce that environment. So I think, it's not going to happen overnight. You understand as well as anybody, probably better than most people, how long these things take. but we're finally actually starting to work on it, right, in a comprehensive way.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this organization in ULFSRI that is looking at the large picture, bringing the amount of resources and the talent necessary to do these things, right? You got to have all the nerds and all the geeks and all the engineers and that can make all this happen, and the team that helps spread that message, right? So as you're making progress, as you're I think they call it amplification is the term that they use within FSRI.
Research amplification.
Yeah, there you go. Research amplification. But without that, right, you're not getting your message out. People aren't seeing the benefit of what research has already been done, right? So that helps people get invested in supporting this over time and look there for learning. So I really think it's an exciting time, because I think the contributions that people like you have made, and Ed Harton and all kinds of folks, that we can start putting these things together in one place, and not just one place, but at least we have a place where all this stuff come together. And there's a group of people dedicated to making this, getting it to the street where it can be used. Whatever it is we learn, let's get it to the fire service where they can learn it. And then it circles back into that research group to say, okay, that was all great, but so we'll start working on the buts. And that's what Steve and his bunch have been doing since they started. All right, here's what we know. What do you guys think? And then people say, okay, that's cool, but all right. And then they start working on all, and that's how research goes, right? That's what science is. Trying to we in our country anyway, we're terrible with science and what does it mean? I don't think we're all that unique. We tend to. But it's just this, when you didn't prove, it's not like we're not trying to prove anything. We're trying to be less stupid than we were yesterday. I mean, that's all you can hope for, right? You're never gonna, has you all figured out what, whether straight stream is better than fog? Well, no, because that's not what they're there to try to do, right? We're just trying to be a little less stupid than we were when we started out. And I think we're starting to get that idea across, right? This is about, can we make these incremental improvements in our profession? And and that's what'll lead to a safer work environment, right? When we become better at what we do because we understand it better.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and I think there's really important that instructors feel that they are responsible for a simulation.
Yeah,
and I think that so because I want to go back to touch upon what you said. We want to simulate the real environment to the extent we can in terms of driving home the lessons for the students. But it's so hard to do that. It's technically hard to simulate that environment. Like just the black smoke. That's a tough chemical and physical problem. Like like everything small is sort of dangerous and dirty, and if it's too small, it doesn't look anything. So if you make it bigger, it's get heavier, it falls down, and like this, like to get soot in the air to look at, because soot is dangerous. Like to actually get soot, but it's not soot in the air. Like that's a technical problem. But anyway, like if we're just supposed to simulate things. It's so important that instructors kind of start the day with saying, okay, how do we simulate this? Not how do we run a training that lets firefighters do this and this and this. If you don't put simulation in front of that, you're going to fail because you don't have that mindset as an instructor saying that, okay, I know that this is not real. I know that doesn't work as well, but how can we simulate that in the best way? And VR is not there yet. I at least in my mind and so on, but there will be a technological evolution there too, where we can better or at least complement or simulate things in VR or and AR and so on. I think that there's a digital environment also in the physical space, meaning all screens and lights and everything that it can also think. I'm very sad that because I'm very focused on the thermal imager. And like to assess things with the thermal imager is a key skill for firefighters, at least, if you have a thermal imager, but you should have a thermal imager, at least hopefully a good one. But I talk to manufacturers saying, look, I need a training tick. Like if I put things like, but and they're like, no, it's like we're too big to build things that small. Like in terms of, I said, this is a huge market. Like we have all this gas prop. We all like if you look at a training, like a part-time station here, they don't have a training building. They use basements and stuff like that. If I can put like a sensor in the ceiling, whenever the director tick at that point, it gives them a temperature reading if they should cool or not. Like that's a huge difference in terms of what I can teach them about. Like, see this, do this. See this, do this.
Right.
And to me, it seems like a very technically simple problem. Like make your thermal imager with a different software that says, if I see this radiation or see this sensor or whatever it might be, give me this vision. Instead of making it 600 degrees, it just have to look 600 degrees and so on.
Exactly.
But the manufacturer talked to was like, no, this is such a small problem. We don't want to work on it. I'm so frustrated. But yeah. So there is ways to simulate things that make us what we need. Like if I want to have flows in the thermal imager, right now I have to make carbonaceous class A smoke to see that flow in the ceiling, go like, okay, I see the flow come from that direction. I need to go there to extinguish and so on. But if I can make that, because I can make it hot, I can put a electrical panel on the ceiling and I can make that 200 degrees Celsius, and I can look at it tick and see, oh, it's hot, I need to cool, but I can't get flow. And if I don't get flow, I'm missing 50%, a huge chunk of the visual inputs I want to create to the students. Yeah. So if they just give me that, I go like, oh, now I can almost live. Okay, sure, the smoke is white, but at least in the thermal imager, it looks hot, and I see flow, and I can give those inputs. Yeah. So I'm confident there's a future, but I'm just disappointed that on the lack of speed, maybe for some of the bigger developers, for instance. Right.
I could share your pain.
They say in the SWAT community, slow is good. Slow is controlled is fast, or whatever it might be. But look, I don't like that. I want to be fast.
But the 21st century is on your side, Lars, because the more advanced technologies become, the more companies diversify. I think that, and the whole pandemic, it's another silver lining of the pandemic. There's more startups, there's more people innovating. I think there's opportunities here if you just keep pounding the message home, right? That we'll find more and more, not the big players, but the little players that want to break in.
Yeah.
There's opportunities there. Because you don't have to solve the whole problem.
Repurposing old ticks, making them to training ticks. I'm really happy to talk to you, Pete. It was a blast. I've had some new thoughts, and I like new thoughts.
Thanks for having me on.
We didn't really talk about the society and so on, but maybe that's a recheck.
Yeah, I'm going to get in big trouble with Lee Hubbard, and
because it didn't promote it at all.
Yeah, I didn't spin it, but give me 30 seconds. So I'm going to. About to be the immediate past president of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. And a lot of what we do is related to what we talked about today. How do you make good instructors? That's what we're all about, right? Not about getting you a certificate, but what do you do? Okay, so now you've got the job and someone's given you this mandate and told you to go fix the problem. What are you going to do about it? And we provide support for that. We provide mentorship. We provide professional development help, all that kind of stuff. And we also have a really good cadre of 1403 instructors. So if you're in the U.S. and you need to get that certification, we can help you with that. And a few other things. So that's what we do. Maybe we'll get to talk about that a little bit more next time. And
every time I've been in the United States, I always end up meeting someone from the ISFSI. So you got your hands in all kinds of cookie jars, which is important. To be able to influence, but also be influenced by everything that's happening. The only thing concern I have is the international side of it. It's very not international. You have to
Yeah.
work on that international piece. Why don't you send
We are
people
working on it.
Yeah, you
We're
need to
always-
send some
it's-
more people to the good old Europe and do some training
Okay.
here. We need to send some more instructors from Europe to do training in United States. There has to be a, you know, transatlantic cooperation here.
Yes, it would help.
That it would help tremendously, because I think that we're in a time where I see, if you know, painting in a really broad brush, like America is adopting European, really big brush here, European more understanding of fire behavior,
Right.
anti-ventilation, like more
Sure.
more cautious ventilation.
Yep.
And Europe will, you know, give me a couple of more years, will adopt straight streams as a, you know, the fundamental way of cooling smoke.
Okay.
No, but I think, you know, and other things. But there's a happy merger here, you know, with North America and Europe that's going to be really beneficial for the fire service at large.
It is.
I think, you know, organizations like
We always just say the society makes it easier.
It's just too many. It's just too many.
Yeah.
It's the National Society of Fire Service Instructors. Organizations like that promote this exchange, I think is important. And I do think that you in that organization would gain tremendous amount about going to Europe also and learning from a lot of good European instructors.
Let's set it up. Let's do it.
Yeah, well, the pandemic is slowing.
Yeah, that's
so
you got to get over that, but we will.
Yeah, cool. Again, Pete, thank you for being here.
Thank you
for talking.
Thanks for the opportunity.